I stepped off the plane at George Bush Intercontinental Airport with my duffel slung over one shoulder and the desert still clinging to my boots in fine grains of sand I couldn't quite shake loose. 22 months. That's how long I'd been gone from Houston, deployed with the 75th Ranger Regiment in operations I couldn't talk about with anyone who didn't have the right clearance. The air conditioning hit me like a wall after the Middle Eastern heat, and I stood there for a moment in the terminal, letting civilians flow around me like water around a stone. They were in their own worlds, staring at phones, dragging luggage, complaining about delays. Normal people living normal lives. I'd forgotten what that looked like. My phone buzzed as soon as I turned it off airplane mode. 3 missed calls from my sister Rachel, 2 texts from my mom, 1 voicemail from my old high school buddy Marcus asking when I was getting in, and if I wanted to grab a beer. I didn't call anyone back right away. The crowd felt too thick, too loud, too present. I just wanted to get to my truck and drive to my apartment and sleep for about 16 hours straight. Maybe order some real Texas barbecue. Maybe sit on my couch without checking corners for threats. Maybe stop waking up at 0:30 with my hand reaching for a rifle that wasn't there. The parking lot was a maze of concrete and cars glinting in the late afternoon sun. October in Houston meant the heat was finally breaking, but it still felt like walking through warm soup. I found my truck where I'd left it with Marcus, a 2015 Ford F-150 that looked like it hadn't been washed in the entire time I was gone. There was a parking ticket on the windshield. I crumpled it up and tossed it in the bed. Marcus had promised to move it every few days. Apparently, that hadn't happened. I didn't care. I was home. Traffic on I-45 South was its usual nightmare. Stop and go, brake lights stretching to the horizon, people cutting each other off like they were in some kind of race they'd already lost. I kept the radio on some classic rock station and tried to zone out, but my eyes kept tracking movement in the other cars, watching hands, watching faces, looking for threats that weren't there. Deployment habits died hard. A woman in a Honda Civic next to me was screaming into her phone. A guy in a BMW was eating what looked like a burrito while steering with his knees. Normal chaos, American chaos, the kind I'd spent almost 2 years defending, even if most people here would never know it. My apartment was in Montrose, a neighborhood I'd picked because it was close to downtown but still had some personality. Tree-lined streets, old houses mixed with new developments, enough dive bars and taco trucks to keep me fed. The place was a 3rd-floor walk-up in a building that had been nice about 30 years ago. I climbed the stairs with my duffel, unlocked the door, and stepped into a space that felt both familiar and completely foreign. Everything was exactly where I'd left it. The couch I'd bought used off Craigslist, the TV mounted on the wall, the kitchen table with one wobbly leg. But it felt like someone else's life, like I was walking into a museum display labeled, "How a 29-year-old staff sergeant lives when he's not getting shot at." I dropped my duffel, grabbed a beer from the fridge that was miraculously still cold, and sat on the couch. The beer was flat and tasted like it had been sitting there since before I left, but I drank it anyway. Outside, the city hummed with traffic and voices and the distant wail of sirens. Always sirens in Houston, police, ambulance, fire trucks, the soundtrack of a city that never quite slowed down. I closed my eyes and tried to feel like I was really here, really home, really safe. It didn't work. Rachel called again around 7. I answered this time. "Derek, oh my God, you're finally back. Why didn't you call me? Mom's been freaking out. She made a whole dinner for tomorrow night. You better show up or she's going to kill you herself." Rachel had always talked in exclamation points. She was 5 years younger than me, working as a nurse at Houston Methodist Hospital downtown, and had somehow maintained her optimism despite seeing the worst things people could do to their bodies on a daily basis. "I just got in," I said, still unpacking. "Unpacking what? You live like a monk. Just come tomorrow at 6, okay? And don't bring anything. Mom's cooking enough to feed your entire unit." "Just me now," I said. She went quiet for a second. "Right, sorry, I'm glad you're home, Derek. Really glad." We talked for a few more minutes about nothing important. How was the flight? How was the weather? Had I heard about the new restaurant that opened on Westheimer? Normal sibling conversation that felt like we were reading from a script. She didn't ask about where I'd been or what I'd done, and I didn't offer. That was the deal with my family. They knew I'd been somewhere dangerous doing something I couldn't talk about, and they pretended it was like any other job. I loved them for that, even if it made the gap between us feel wider every time I came back. After I hung up, I turned on the TV. Local news. The anchor was a woman with perfect hair and a smile that probably hurt her face to maintain. She was talking about traffic and weather and some new construction project downtown. Then the smile faltered just slightly, and she shifted to a story about a pharmaceutical research facility in the medical center having some kind of accident earlier in the week. Biodyne Industries. I'd never heard of them. But Houston was full of medical and biotech companies, clustered around the massive hospital complexes that made up the Texas Medical Center. The anchor said there had been a minor containment breach, but that everything was under control and there was no danger to the public. The company's PR person came on screen, a man in an expensive suit with the kind of smooth voice that made you instantly distrust him, and he repeated the same lines: contained, under control, no danger. The investigation was ongoing. I switched channels, found a game. Astros were playing the Yankees. I watched for a while without really seeing it, finished the terrible beer, and eventually dragged myself to bed. The sheets smelled stale. The mattress felt too soft after months of sleeping on whatever I could find. But I was exhausted, that deep-in-the-bones exhaustion that came from traveling halfway around the world and trying to shift your brain from combat mode to civilian mode, and eventually sleep pulled me under like dark water. I dreamed about things I didn't want to remember: dust and blood and the sound of gunfire echoing off mud brick walls. A kid no older than 12 with explosives strapped to his chest. The weight of a body in a poncho liner as we carried him to the helo. I woke up at 0400 covered in sweat with my heart hammering and my hand reaching for a rifle that wasn't there. The apartment was dark and quiet. No mortars, no gunfire, no radio chatter. Just the distant hum of Houston waking up and the sound of my own breathing. I lay there staring at the ceiling until the sun started to come up, and then I got up and went for a run. The streets were empty at that hour, just a few cars and the occasional dog walker. I ran my usual route through Montrose and over to Buffalo Bayou, pushing myself harder than I needed to, trying to outrun the dreams that clung to me like smoke. The air was thick and humid, even in October, and by the time I got back to my apartment, I was drenched. I showered, made coffee, and tried to figure out what to do with myself. I had 2 weeks of leave before I had to report back to Fort Benning for reassignment. 2 weeks to pretend I was a normal person living a normal life in a normal city. Marcus texted around 9 asking if I wanted to meet up. He worked construction, had since we graduated high school, and apparently had the day off. We agreed to meet at a diner near Rice University for lunch. I spent the morning doing the things I'd been putting off: unpacking my duffel, doing laundry, checking my bank account to see how much money I'd managed to save. The Army paid okay, especially with combat pay and hazard pay and all the other little bonuses that came from being somewhere people were actively trying to kill you. I'd been sending most of it home, saving it for something I hadn't quite figured out yet. Maybe a house, maybe a new truck, maybe just insurance against the day when my body finally gave out and I couldn't do this job anymore. The diner was one of those old-school places with red vinyl booths and waitresses who called everyone Han and coffee that tasted like it had been brewing since the Carter administration. Marcus was already there when I arrived, sitting in a corner booth with a menu he didn't need. He'd been coming here since we were kids. He knew what he was going to order before he walked in the door. "Brother," he stood up and pulled me into a hug that would have cracked ribs on a smaller man. Marcus was built like a linebacker, all shoulders and muscle from years of hauling rebar and pouring concrete. He'd put on some weight since I'd last seen him, but he still looked like he could tear a phone book in half just for fun. "Welcome home, man. Welcome the hell home." We sat and ordered, and he asked the normal questions. "How was it over there? You kill any bad guys, you gonna re-enlist?" I gave him the normal answers, vague and non-committal, and steered the conversation back to him. His life was easier to talk about. He'd gotten engaged to a woman named Tasha I'd met once before I deployed. They were planning a wedding for next spring. He was making good money working for a big construction firm doing commercial builds. He'd bought a house in Katy, one of the sprawling suburbs west of the city. He had a dog, a Labrador named Bear. Normal life stuff that felt both enviable and completely out of reach. "You hear about that thing at the research place?" he asked between bites of a burger that was more grease than meat. "The one in the medical center?" Saw something on the news, I said. Containment breach or something. Yeah, man, but it's been weird. My cousin works at Herman Hospital, and she said they've been getting people coming in with some kind of flu that's not responding to any treatment. High fevers, seizures, violent outbursts. They've had to lock a few people down in restraints. And she said the company, Biodyne or whatever, they sent people over to the hospital, all hush-hush, trying to take samples and asking questions. Real shady shit. It's probably nothing, I said, but something in the back of my head, the part that had kept me alive through multiple deployments, perked up and paid attention. Companies cover their asses when they screw up. That's just business. Maybe, Marcus said, but he didn't sound convinced. Tasha's been saying I should get a flu shot. Every year she nags me about it. I keep telling her I got an immune system like a tank. We finished lunch and sat around for a while talking about nothing important. Old high school stories, people we knew who'd gotten married or had kids or moved away or died. The comfortable rhythm of friends who'd known each other long enough that silence wasn't awkward. Eventually he had to get going. Some errand Tasha needed him to run, and we said goodbye with promises to get together again before I had to leave. I watched him drive off in his truck, a newer model than mine with an engagement ring payment plan probably attached to it, and I felt that strange disconnect again. His life was moving forward. Marriage, house, dog, stable job. Mine was just moving. No direction, no destination, just motion for the sake of motion. I drove back to my apartment and spent the rest of the afternoon trying to be productive. I went to the grocery store and bought actual food instead of just beer and frozen pizza. I cleaned the apartment even though it wasn't dirty. I called my mom and confirmed I'd be there for dinner tomorrow. She sounded happy in that slightly worried way mothers had when their sons came back from war. She didn't ask questions. None of them ever did. It was like they thought if they pretended I'd just been on a business trip, it would make everything normal. That night I couldn't sleep. I lay in bed watching shadows move across the ceiling and listening to the city outside. More sirens than usual. Or maybe I was just noticing them more. Around midnight I gave up and turned on the TV, late night news. The anchor was different, but the stories were the same. Another press conference about Biodyne Industries. The CEO this time, a woman with gray hair and glasses and the kind of calm authority that came from years of managing crises. She assured everyone that the situation was contained. A few employees had been exposed to an experimental vaccine that had caused unexpected side effects, but they were receiving treatment and expected to make full recoveries. The facility had been shut down temporarily while the CDC conducted an investigation. Everything was fine, nothing to worry about. Go about your lives. I switched to a news channel, CNN or MSNBC. I couldn't tell them apart anymore. They were talking about international news, some new conflict in Eastern Europe, a terrorist bombing in Morocco, political scandals in Washington, the usual background noise of a world that was always on fire somewhere. But then they cut to a story about a series of coordinated attacks across 3 European cities, claimed by a new extremist group calling itself the New Caliphate. Intelligence agencies were investigating connections between the group and several missing scientists specializing in infectious diseases. The reporter mentioned that one of the scientists had previously worked at a pharmaceutical facility in Houston before disappearing 6 months ago. Biodyne Industries. I sat up straighter. That tingling feeling in the back of my head got stronger. The pieces were there, scattered across different stories, different channels, different contexts, but they were pieces of something bigger. A research facility with a containment breach, sick people flooding hospitals, scientists connected to terrorist groups. It was the kind of pattern recognition the Army had drilled into me. See the connections, trust your instincts, assume the worst-case scenario because the worst-case scenario was usually what got you killed. But this was Houston. This was home. This was supposed to be safe. I was supposed to be done with this shit. I turned off the TV and tried to sleep again. It didn't work. The next day was Thursday. I spent the morning trying to shake the feeling that something was wrong. Went for another run, made breakfast, read the news on my phone. The stories about Biodyne had shifted from page 1 to page 5. Just another corporate accident. Already old news in a city that moved fast and had short attention span. But I couldn't let it go. Maybe it was just readjustment paranoia. Maybe I was looking for threats or there weren't any because that's what I'd been doing for the last 22 months. Maybe I just needed to relax. I drove to my mom's house around 5. She lived in the Heights, one of the older neighborhoods north of downtown that had been slowly gentrifying over the last decade. The house was the same one I'd grown up in, a small 2-bedroom with a front porch that sagged slightly and a yard my dad had obsessed over before he died when I was 17. Mom had kept the place up as best she could, but time had a way of wearing things down. Paint peeled, boards warped, the roof probably needed replacing. I made a mental note to fix some things while I was here. Rachel's car was already in the driveway, a little Honda Civic she'd bought used and loved like it was made of gold. I could hear voices inside as I walked up the porch steps. Mom and Rachel arguing about something, probably food or decorations or some other thing that seemed important but wasn't. The sound made me smile despite myself. This was home. This was normal. This was what I'd been protecting all those miles away. I knocked even though I had a key. Mom opened the door and pulled me into a hug that smelled like perfume and cooking and home. "Derek, oh sweetheart, come in. You look so skinny. Hasn't the army been feeding you?" "I'm fine, Mom." But I hugged her back, feeling how small she'd gotten, or maybe I'd just gotten bigger. Hard to tell. Rachel appeared behind her, already grinning. "The prodigal soldier returns. Did you bring me anything from the desert?" "Sand and PTSD, I said." "Derek." Mom swatted my arm, but Rachel laughed. Dark humor. It was how we coped. Dinner was exactly what Mom had promised. Enough food to feed a platoon, fried chicken, mashed potatoes, green beans, biscuits, gravy, and a pecan pie for dessert. We sat around the small kitchen table, the same one we'd sat at for thousands of meals over the years, and fell into the comfortable rhythm of family. Mom asked about my flight. Rachel talked about her shift at the hospital. I told them sanitized versions of stories that left out anything that would keep them awake at night. We laughed. We ate. We pretended everything was normal. But halfway through dessert, Rachel's phone rang. She looked at the screen and frowned. "It's work. I'm not on call tonight." She answered anyway. "Hello? Yeah, this is Rachel." Her face changed. The smile faded. Her eyes went distant and focused in that way medical professionals had when they shifted into work mode. "How many?" "Jesus." "Okay, I'll be there in 30 minutes. She hung up and stood. "I have to go. They're calling in everyone. Some kind of mass casualty event. Multiple hospitals are getting slammed." "What happened?" Mom asked, already worried. "They didn't say, just said we need all hands on deck." Rachel grabbed her purse and keys, kissed Mom on the cheek, squeezed my shoulder. "Sorry, Derek. Welcome home dinner. Part 2, later this week." "Be safe," I said, and something in my voice made her pause and look at me. "Always am." But she looked uncertain. I watched her leave, heard her car start and pull away, and felt that feeling in the back of my head turn into a low warning alarm. Mom started clearing plates, trying to fill the silence with activity, but I pulled out my phone and started checking news sites. Local news, national news, Twitter, nothing yet. But something was happening. I could feel it the same way you could feel a storm coming before the first drops of rain. "Derek, honey, you okay?" Mom was watching me from the kitchen, hands wet with dish soap, worry creasing her face. "Yeah, Mom, just tired. I should probably get going." "You just got here." "I know, I'm sorry, I need to get some rest." She didn't believe me, I could tell, but she didn't push. That was her way. She'd learned a long time ago that sometimes her son went places in his head she couldn't follow, and the best thing to do was let him work through it. She dried her hands and walked me to the door, hugged me again, made me promise to call her tomorrow. "I love you, sweetheart. I'm glad you're home." "Love you too, Mom." I drove back to my apartment with the radio on, flipping between stations, catching fragments of breaking news. Reports of violent outbreaks at several Houston hospitals. Patients attacking staff. Police responding to multiple domestic disturbances across the city. Nothing concrete yet, just pieces, but the pieces were forming a picture I didn't like. I thought about calling Rachel, but didn't. She'd be busy, she'd be doing her job, she didn't need me distracting her. By the time I got home, it was fully dark, and the sirens I'd been noticing for the last 2 days had multiplied into a constant wail that seemed to come from every direction at once. I stood on my balcony and looked out over the neighborhood. More flashing lights than usual. Red and blue painting the streets. I could hear shouting in the distance, a car alarm going off. Somewhere nearby, glass breaking. I went back inside and did something I hadn't done since I got home. I dug through my closet until I found the lock case I'd stored in the back. Inside was my personal sidearm, a Glock 19 I'd bought years ago and kept properly registered and maintained. I loaded a magazine, chambered a round, and set it on the coffee table. Then I turned on the TV and waited. The news broke around 10 p.m. Every channel, every station, wall-to-wall coverage. Reports of mass violence across Houston, Herman Hospital, Houston Methodist, Ben Taub, St. Luke's, all reporting patients experiencing extreme aggression and violent outbursts, multiple deaths, staff injuries. Police were responding but seemed overwhelmed by the number of incidents. Videos shot on cell phones were already flooding social media. Shaky footage of people attacking each other in emergency rooms, blood on hospital floors, nurses running, security guards trying to restrain patients who moved with inhuman strength and seemed to feel no pain. And then the words started appearing. Infection, outbreak, virus, Biodyne Industries issued a statement around 11. The CEO, the same calm woman from the previous press conference, looked significantly less calm now. She admitted that the containment breach had been more serious than initially reported. An experimental vaccine designed to regenerate damaged neural tissue had been contaminated with a modified strain of rabies virus. The combination had created something unexpected, something that attacked the brain, destroyed higher functions, left only base instincts, hunger, aggression, violence. Several employees had been infected before the breach was discovered. They'd gone home to their families, gone to work at other locations, spread it through the city like wildfire. The incubation period was short, 12 to 24 hours. The symptoms were rapid: fever, seizures, violent psychosis, and then, she hesitated, death of the conscious mind. The body remained animate, driven by brainstem functions, but the person was gone. She didn't use the word zombie. Nobody did yet. But I knew what I was looking at. I'd seen enough horror movies, read enough post-apocalyptic fiction during long nights on base. This was that. This was the nightmare scenario every prepper and conspiracy theorist had been warning about. Except it was real. It was happening. It was happening in my city. My phone rang. Marcus. Derek, man, you seen this? Yeah. What the fuck is this? What the actual fuck? I don't know. Lie. I knew exactly what it was. Where are you? Home. Katie, but Tasha's downtown working a late shift at her office. I can't get through to her. Phones are jammed. I'm about to drive in and get her. Don't. The word came out harder than I meant it. Marcus, listen to me. Stay where you are. Lock your doors. Stay away from anyone who seems sick. Do you have weapons? I got a shotgun and a pistol. Why are you talking like this? Because this is bad. This is really bad. Just trust me and stay put. I'll call you later. I hung up before he could argue. Tried to call Rachel. No answer. Tried again. Straight to voicemail. I texted her. Where are you? Are you safe? Call me. Nothing back. The news was spiraling into chaos. More footage, more reports. The infection was spreading faster than anyone had predicted. Hospitals were being overrun not just by patients, but by the infected breaking out of isolation. Police scanners, broadcast live on news channels, were a cacophony of desperate calls for backup. Officer down, active shooter, except there were no guns, just teeth and hands and bodies that kept moving even after taking multiple shots. And then the word came. Official statement from the mayor's office. State of emergency declared. Martial law in effect. National Guard being mobilized. Citizens instructed to shelter in place. Do not leave your homes. Do not interact with anyone showing signs of illness. Avoid the medical center area and downtown Houston. Emergency services were overwhelmed. Help might not come immediately. Stay calm. Stay safe. More information would be provided as it became available. The television showed footage from news helicopters, fires burning in several parts of the city, crowds fleeing through streets, traffic jams that stretched for miles as people tried to evacuate, and scattered throughout figures that moved wrong, staggered and lurched and grabbed at anyone too slow to run. The camera zoomed in on one, a man in a hospital gown covered in blood, his face slack and eyes empty, chasing down a woman and tackling her to the ground. The camera quickly panned away before showing what happened next, but I could imagine. I'd seen enough combat to know what human beings looked like when they tore into each other. I stood up and started gathering supplies. Old habits from deployment kicked in. Inventory your resources, prepare for worst case, assume no resupply. I had some canned food in the kitchen, bottled water, first aid kit under the bathroom sink. I pulled my old assault pack from the closet and started loading it. Food, water, medical supplies, flashlight, batteries, lighter, duct tape, paracord, all the things you needed when civilization stopped working. I added the Glock and spare magazines. Wished I had my rifle from base, but that wasn't an option. This would have to do. My phone buzzed. Text from Rachel at Methodist. It's bad, Derek. It's really bad. They're everywhere we can. The message cut off. I called immediately. Didn't ring. Just went straight to that automated message about the network being busy. I tried again. Same thing. Texted, Rachel. Where are you exactly? What floor? I'm coming. No response. I grabbed my keys and my pack and headed for the door. Stopped. Thought about it. This was stupid. The city was falling apart. The smart move was to stay put, wait for the authorities to get control, not run toward the danger like some kind of hero. But Rachel was at Houston Methodist. That was maybe 4 miles from here, 4 miles through a city losing its mind. And she was my sister. That's all that mattered. I checked the Glock one more time. 17 rounds in the magazine, 1 in the chamber, 3 spare magazines in my pack. 70 rounds total. If I needed more than that, I was probably already dead. I opened the door and stepped out into the hallway. The building was quiet, but I could hear television through walls, voices raised in fear or confusion. From somewhere above me, someone was crying. I took the stairs down instead of the elevator. Training. Always have an exit route. Never trap yourself in a box. The street outside was chaos, trying to pretend it wasn't chaos yet. Cars were parked haphazardly, some still running with doors open like their owners had abandoned them mid-flight. A few people were loading belongings into vehicles with frantic urgency. A man across the street was boarding up his windows with plywood. The air smelled like smoke and something else, something organic and wrong that I couldn't quite place. Sirens wailed from every direction, so many that they blended into one continuous scream. I got in my truck and pulled out onto the street. Traffic was snarled but not completely stopped yet. Everyone had the same idea: get out, get away, get somewhere safer. But there was nowhere to go and too many people trying to get there. I worked my way south and east toward the medical center, cutting through side streets and neighborhoods I knew from growing up here. Cars honked. People screamed at each other through windows. I saw a fender bender that nobody was stopping to exchange information about. Both drivers just leaving their crumpled vehicles in the middle of the intersection and running. Running from what? I didn't see it yet, but I could feel it. That pressure in the air before violence broke out. That electric tension that said everything was about to go to hell. I was 3 blocks from Houston Methodist when I saw my first infected. A woman stumbling down the middle of the street in a nightgown soaked in blood. At first I thought she'd been injured, a victim fleeing from an attacker. But then I saw the way she moved. Jerky, uncoordinated, but with purpose. Her head swiveled toward sound, toward movement. A car swerved to avoid her and she changed direction, chasing after it with a lurching sprint that was faster than any injured person should be able to manage. The car accelerated away, but she didn't stop. She just kept running until she spotted something else. Someone else. A man trying to load a television into his car, probably looting in the confusion. She went for him like a missile. He saw her coming and tried to get in his car but wasn't fast enough. She hit him and they both went down, and I heard his scream even through my closed windows. I drove past. I didn't stop. Couldn't stop. Rachel was close. That's what mattered. But my hands were shaking on the wheel and my heart was hammering, and part of my brain was screaming that this was real. This was actually happening. The world was ending in real time, and I was driving through it like I could somehow stay ahead of the collapse. Houston Methodist Hospital rose up ahead of me, a massive complex of buildings and parking garages that took up several city blocks. The emergency entrance was visible from the street, and what I saw made my stomach drop. Bodies on the ground, some moving, most not, people running, police cars with lights flashing and doors open, abandoned, a burning ambulance sending up thick black smoke, and scattered throughout, figures that moved with that same jerky, wrong gait, hunting, feeding. I saw one bent over a body on the ground, and when it raised its head, I could see blood dripping from its mouth, see the empty eyes and slack face of something that used to be human but wasn't anymore. I couldn't drive any closer. The street was blocked by abandoned cars and debris. I parked the truck, grabbed my pack, and got out. The Glock came out of my waistband and into my hand without thinking. Muscle memory. I'd cleared buildings in combat zones from Fallujah to Kandahar. This was just another building, just another op. Except the enemy wasn't following any rules of engagement, and I had no backup. And my sister was somewhere inside. The hospital's front entrance was 20 yards away across a plaza that should have been empty. It wasn't. Bodies. Living and dead. Infected and uninfected. The line between them blurring as I watched. A security guard was trying to barricade the doors with chairs and equipment, but 3 infected were already pushing through, drawn by the movement, by the noise, by the prey. I ran toward them, not thinking, just moving. The guard saw me coming and yelled something I couldn't hear over the sirens and screams. I raised the Glock and fired 3 times, center mass, controlled pairs the way I'd been trained. The first infected went down, the second staggered but kept coming, headshot. The training kicked in, brainstem, destroy the central nervous system. The second infected dropped. The third turned toward me, a nurse in scrubs that were shredded and soaked in blood, her face a mask of rage and hunger. I shot her in the head from 10 feet away. She collapsed like a puppet with cut strings. The guard stared at me, eyes wide. What the fuck, man? What the fuck? Help me move these. I grabbed the first body and dragged it away from the door. The guard hesitated for a second, then joined me. We cleared the entrance, and he slammed the doors shut, locked them, pushed a desk against them. It wouldn't hold for long. Nothing would hold for long if enough of them came. "Where's the nursing staff?" I asked. "There was a nurse, Rachel Woods. She texted me about an hour ago. Where would she be?" "I don't know, man. I don't know anything. They came out of the isolation ward. Just started attacking everyone. We tried to contain them, but there's too many. 4th floor is completely overrun. 3rd floor is bad. We're evacuating down to 1st and trying to hold there, but..." He looked at the doors. More shapes were visible through the glass, moving closer, drawn by the sound of gunfire. "4th floor, how do I get there?" "You can't, man. It's a death trap up there." "My sister's up there." He looked at me, saw something in my face that made him nod. "Stairs, east side of the building. But you're gonna die." "Maybe." I checked my magazine. 13 rounds left, reloaded with a fresh one. "Lock this down after me. Don't let anyone in unless you're sure they're clean." I moved deeper into the hospital. The 1st floor was chaos, but controlled chaos. Medical staff and security were trying to triage the wounded, separate the infected from the injured, maintain some kind of order. I saw nurses with makeshift weapons, fire extinguishers, and scalpels, and whatever else they could find. I saw patients on gurneys screaming. I saw blood on every surface. The smell was overwhelming, copper and smoke and human waste, and that organic rot smell that meant dead bodies in hot weather. No one stopped me. No one even looked at me. They were too busy trying to save lives or save themselves. I found the east stairwell and pushed through the door. The stairwell was concrete and cold, and the fluorescent lights flickered. I could hear sounds echoing from above, banging, screaming, wet tearing noises that I tried not to think about. I started climbing, 2nd floor landing, empty. Doors to the ward were chained shut from the inside. Smart. 3rd floor landing, blood on the walls. A body in hospital scrubs at the bottom of the next flight of stairs, neck bent at an angle that meant dead before they finished falling. I stepped over them and kept climbing. 4th floor. The door was hanging open, one hinge torn loose. More blood, handprints smeared across the walls like someone had tried to crawl away. I pushed through. The 4th floor hallway was a slaughterhouse. Bodies everywhere, staff, patients, infected. The difference was hard to tell. The ones that were still moving had that characteristic jerky motion, that single-minded purpose. They were feeding on the dead and dying, crouched over bodies like animals at a kill. The air was thick with the smell of blood and shit and death. I'd been in combat zones that smelled better. I moved carefully, Glock up, checking corners, stepping over debris. Looking for Rachel. The nurse's station was ahead, phones ringing endlessly, monitors showing flat lines. Behind the desk, I found 3 nurses huddled together. One of them saw me and almost screamed before clamping a hand over her mouth. "Rachel Woods," I whispered. "Where is she?" One of them, an older woman with gray hair and blood splattered across her scrubs, pointed down the hall. "Break room, end of the hall. She's with survivors, maybe 5 or 6 people, but they're trapped. The infected are between us and them." I looked. The hallway stretched about 50 feet to the break room door at the end. Between here and there, I could see at least 4 infected, maybe more in rooms off the hallway, not great odds. "Stay here," I said. "Stay quiet. I'm going to clear a path." "You can't," the gray-haired nurse said. "There's too many." "Watch me." I started down the hallway, moved like I was back in Mosul, clearing rooms house to house. Slow, controlled, keep your breathing steady, identify targets, prioritize threats. The first infected was a man in a patient gown, his IV still trailing from his arm. He was bent over a body, feeding. I put a round through his brainstem from 15 feet. Suppressed Glock would have been better, but I didn't have that luxury. The sound was loud in the enclosed space. The other infected reacted immediately, heads snapping up, locating the noise. They came for me. 3 of them, different speeds. The closest was fast, a younger man who'd probably been athletic before he died and came back. I shot him twice, chest and head. He went down. The other 2 were slower, an older woman and a middle-aged man in a suit. I shot the woman first, then the man. Both headshots, clean and efficient. My ears were ringing from the enclosed gunfire. I kept moving, checking rooms, clearing angles. Found 2 more infected in a patient room, killed them both. My magazine was empty. I dropped it and reloaded. 4th mag. I was burning through ammo faster than I'd planned. The break room door was locked. I knocked. "Rachel! Rachel Woods! It's Derek! Open up!" Sounds from inside, something being moved. The door opened a crack and I saw my sister's face, pale and terrified, but alive. Relief hit me so hard I almost stumbled. "Derek!" She pulled the door open and dragged me inside. 5 other people were in the break room, huddled away from the windows. 2 nurses, a doctor, and 2 civilians who'd probably been visiting patients when everything went to hell. Rachel grabbed me in a hug that hurt. "How are you here? How did you get through?" "Combat training. We need to move. This floor's not defensible." "We know. We've been trying to figure out a way out." The doctor, a South Asian man with blood on his coat and exhaustion in his eyes, gestured to a map of the hospital tacked to the wall. "The main stairwells are compromised. Elevators are down. We thought maybe the roof, get a helicopter extraction, but no one's responding to calls." "No one's coming," I said. "The whole city's falling apart. We're on our own." "So what do we do?" One of the civilians, a woman in her 30s holding a broken chair leg like a weapon. "We go down, get to ground level, get out of the building. Find somewhere safer to hole up until the guard gets here and restores order." "You really think they can?" Rachel asked quietly. I didn't answer, because honestly, I didn't know. We moved as a group back down the hallway. I took point, Glock up, covering our movement. The 3 nurses from the station joined us, making our group 9 people. Too many, too slow. But I couldn't leave them. The stairwell was where I'd left it, and we piled through the door and started down. I could hear sounds echoing from below. More infected, more danger. But staying wasn't an option. 2nd floor was where it went bad. We pushed through the door and immediately ran into a crowd of infected. Must have been 20 of them, patients and staff from the 2nd floor wards, all turned, all hunting. They saw us and rushed forward in a wave of bodies and teeth and grasping hands. I started shooting. Aim, fire, move, aim, fire, move. The training was automatic. My brain went quiet and cold and focused. 1 shot, 1 kill. Headshots, efficient. The people behind me screamed. Someone pushed past me running. Bad move. The infected grabbed him, pulled him down. His screams cut off wet and gurgling. "Move! Go! Back to the stairs!" I emptied my magazine into the crowd. Bodies dropped, but more kept coming. I reloaded on the move, backing toward the stairwell door. Rachel was pulling the others back through. The doctor was helping an older nurse who twisted her ankle. I fired again, dropping 3 more infected, buying us seconds. We got through the door and slammed it shut. Something hit it from the other side immediately, then again. The door shuddered. "It won't hold," the doctor said. "Down, keep moving." We ran down the stairs, first floor, the lobby we'd come through, but when we pushed through the door, we found chaos worse than before. The barricades had failed. Infected were pouring in through broken windows and doors. The security guard I talked to was down, 3 infected feeding on him. Medical staff were running in every direction. Gunfire from somewhere, security or police trying to fight back. Not enough, never enough. "West exit!" Rachel grabbed my arm and pointed. "Service exit. Kitchen staff use it." We ran, through hallways slick with blood, past rooms where people were dying or already dead, past infected who were too busy feeding to chase us. I was down to my last magazine, maybe 10 rounds, not enough if we got caught in the open. The west exit appeared ahead, a heavy steel door with a push bar. We hit it at full speed and burst out into the parking lot. Night air, smoke, sirens, the city burning on the horizon. The parking lot was full of abandoned cars and scattered bodies. Some moved, most didn't. I could see the street beyond, traffic stalled, people running. No clear path, no safety anywhere. "My truck's 3 blocks north," I said. "We run. Stay together. If someone falls, we leave them. Understood?" No one argued. They'd all seen what happened when you stopped in a crisis. We ran. We made it 2 blocks before we lost someone. One of the civilians, an older man who couldn't keep pace. An infected came out of nowhere from behind a car and tackled him. He went down screaming and we kept running. Rachel looked back, but I grabbed her arm and pulled her forward. Couldn't stop. Couldn't help him. The math was brutal, but simple. 8 people left. My truck could fit maybe 6 uncomfortably. Decisions would have to be made. We reached my truck and I got the doors open. People piled in. Rachel in front with me. 5 others crammed in the back and truck bed. Not safe, but nothing was safe. I started the engine and pulled out, driving over curbs and through yards to avoid the stalled traffic. Someone in the back was crying, someone else was praying. I focused on driving, on navigating through a city that was tearing itself apart block by block. "Where are we going?" Rachel asked. Her voice was shaking but steady. "Nurse training, keep it together in crisis." "My apartment, get supplies, figure out next moves." "You think we're safe there?" "No, but it's better than here." We drove through hell, fires burning unchecked, stores being looted, people fighting in the streets over supplies, over cars, over nothing. I saw an infected tackle a woman off a bicycle, saw a man shoot 3 people trying to steal his truck, saw a police car flipped on its side, officers nowhere to be seen. The radio was all emergency broadcast now, recorded messages on repeat, shelter in place, avoid contact with infected individuals. Help is coming, lies, all lies. No help was coming fast enough. My apartment building came into view and I felt a small measure of relief. The street was relatively clear. The building looked intact. I parked as close to the entrance as possible and we got out fast. One of the nurses didn't make it. An infected came around the corner and grabbed her before anyone could react. She screamed and I put her down with a headshot, both her and the infected. Mercy. Last round in my magazine. We left her body and ran inside. The building was dark. Power must have failed. We used flashlights and phone lights to navigate up the stairs to my 3rd-floor apartment. My hands shook as I unlocked the door. We piled inside and I locked it behind us, pushed my couch against it for good measure. Not enough. Never enough. But it was something. 6 of us left now. Rachel, the doctor whose name I learned was Vikram, 2 nurses named Sarah and Michelle, and 1 civilian, the woman with the chair leg whose name was Jennifer. We stood in my small living room breathing hard, covered in blood and worse, alive but barely. "Water in the kitchen," I said. "Food in the cabinets. Bathroom down the hall. Help yourselves. We'll figure out what's next after everyone catches their breath." They scattered to take care of basic needs. I went to my bedroom and changed out of my blood-soaked clothes, put on jeans and a long-sleeve shirt and boots, grabbed my assault pack and emptied it out, repacked it more carefully. More ammo, more supplies, a fixed blade knife from my deployment gear, a headlamp. Everything I should have grabbed the first time. Then I went back to the living room and found Rachel sitting on the floor with her back against the wall, staring at nothing. I sat down next to her. "You okay?" No. She looked at me with hollow eyes. Derek, what's happening? How is this real? I don't know, but we're alive. That's what matters. For how long? I didn't have an answer to that. We spent the rest of the night in my apartment, taking turns keeping watch at the windows. The city continued to burn. The sounds of violence and chaos echoed through the night, sometimes close, sometimes distant, never stopping. I tried calling Marcus but got no answer. Tried texting, nothing. Tried my mom, same. The cell networks were overloaded or down. We were isolated, cut off, alone. Around 3 a.m., the others had passed out from exhaustion. Rachel was still awake, sitting at the window watching the city die. I joined her. When I was in Kandahar, I said quietly, we went into this village that had been hit by the Taliban, everyone dead. Men, women, children, executed in their homes. The village elder had been opposed to them, so they killed everyone he'd ever known. We spent 3 days clearing the area and burying bodies. Worst 3 days of my deployment. I thought I'd never see anything like that again. I paused. This is worse. At least the enemy had a face, a reason. This is just chaos. You think we'll survive, Ikiyam? Rachel asked. I don't know, but I'm going to do everything I can to make sure you do. What about you? I'll be fine. I've survived this long. She didn't believe me. I didn't believe me. But sometimes lies were all you had. Dawn came gray and smoke-choked. The city looked like a war zone. Fires still burned, sending pillars of black smoke into the sky. The streets below were littered with bodies and debris. Cars burned. Buildings burned. Everything burned. No sign of authorities, no sign of the National Guard, no sign that anyone was in control of anything. We gathered in the living room to make plans. Food and water were already concerns. I had supplies for maybe a week if we rationed carefully. After that, we'd need to scavenge. But going outside meant exposure to the infected, exposure to desperate humans who would kill for supplies. It was a no-win situation, getting worse by the hour. We should try to get out of the city, Jennifer said. She'd been quiet all night, but now she spoke up. Head north, away from the population centers. Find somewhere rural, a farm or ranch, somewhere we can defend. How? Michelle, one of the nurses, asked. The highways were parking lots yesterday. They're probably death traps now. Then we use back roads. Take it slow. Scavenge along the way. With what vehicle? Sarah asked. Derek's truck fits 4 people comfortably. There's 6 of us. They argued back and forth. I let them. People needed to feel like they had some control, even if they didn't. But part of me was thinking about something else. Something I'd seen on the news before everything went to hell. A terrorist group claiming responsibility for attacks. Scientists missing from Biodyne. The timing was too perfect. This wasn't just an accident. This was an attack. Someone had weaponized the virus. Someone had released it deliberately. And if that was true, then someone was out there right now taking advantage of the chaos. My phone buzzed. A text message. I stared at it in shock. Cell service was spotty, but apparently still functional in pockets. The message was from an unknown number. Staff Sergeant Woods, I know you're alive. I know you're resourceful. I have a proposition. There's a warehouse at Port of Houston, supplies, weapons, transportation. If you want to survive, meet me there. Come alone, 1,400 hours today, or don't come and die with everyone else. I showed Rachel. What the hell is this? A trap, she said immediately. Maybe, or maybe it's real. You can't be seriously considering it. We need supplies, we need weapons, we need a way out of the city. If there's even a chance this is legit, then we all go, not just you. The message says, come alone. Fuck the message, we stick together. I looked at the others. They'd stopped arguing and were watching us. There might be a supply cache at the Port of Houston, weapons, food, transportation, but it's risky. Could be a trap, could be nothing. Could be our only shot, Dr. Vikram said. If we stay here, we starve or get overrun eventually. At least this gives us a potential out. The group voted 4-2 in favor of checking it out. Rachel and I were the 2 against, but we were outnumbered. Democracy in the apocalypse. We'd leave at noon, take my truck, see what was waiting for us at the port. If it was legit, great. If it was a trap, at least we'd tried. We spent the morning preparing. I showed them how to use my Glock, though I kept it myself. found kitchen knives and gave them out as backup weapons, filled water bottles, packed food, made sure everyone understood basic rules for moving through hostile territory. Stay quiet, stay together, watch every angle, trust nothing. They were civilians with no training, but they were smart and motivated by the most powerful force in existence, the will to survive. At noon, we left the apartment. The building was still quiet, still intact. I wondered how long that would last. We made it to my truck without incident and loaded up. I drove, Rachel in front, 4 others in back. The streets were worse in daylight. You could see everything the darkness had hidden. Bodies everywhere, dozens of them, hundreds. Some fresh, some starting to bloat in the heat. The infected wandered among them, feeding, hunting, waiting. We drove slow and quiet, engine barely audible, avoiding main roads where possible. The Port of Houston was about 15 miles east of downtown. It took us 2 hours to cover the distance, weaving through abandoned traffic and blocked roads. We saw other survivors along the way, people in cars trying to escape, people on foot carrying everything they owned, people who'd given up, just sitting on curbs waiting for death. We didn't stop for any of them, couldn't stop. Resources were too limited. Help was a luxury we couldn't afford. The port district was industrial and abandoned. Warehouses and shipping containers and cranes rising against the sky like skeletal giants. The address from the text message led us to a warehouse near the water, a large metal structure with no windows and one roll-up door. I parked a block away and we approached on foot. "This feels wrong," Rachel whispered. It did. The warehouse was too quiet, too isolated, too perfect for an ambush. But we were here now, and turning back meant admitting defeat. "Stay behind me," I said. "If shooting starts, run back to the truck and get out of here." I approached the roll-up door, found it unlocked, pulled it up slowly, expecting gunfire or infected or worse. Inside was dark, but I could see shapes, pallets, boxes, supplies. I stepped inside, flashlight up, and the door slammed down behind me, trapping me inside. Fuck! I spun, Glock up, searching for targets. Lights flickered on. The warehouse was huge and filled with supplies, guns, ammunition, medical equipment, food and water by the pallet. And standing in the center of it all, flanked by 4 men with rifles, was a man in an expensive suit that looked completely out of place in the apocalypse. "Staff Sergeant Woods," he said in accented English. Middle Eastern, I thought. "I am Omar Bashir. Thank you for coming. Please, lower your weapon. No one needs to die today." I kept the Glock pointed at him. "You're the terrorist, the one who released the virus?" He smiled. Terrorist is such a loaded word. I prefer businessman, and I didn't release the virus, not personally, but I did facilitate its liberation. From Biodyne Industries, the new caliphate paid me well to ensure their scientists had access to the research. What they chose to do with it after was their concern, not mine. You killed millions of people. I made a profit. The world was broken long before I came along. I simply capitalized on an opportunity. And now I'm offering you the same opportunity. Work for me. Help me secure and transport valuable assets. In return, you get supplies, weapons, protection. Valuable assets, you mean people. His smile widened. There's a thriving black market for healthy humans right now. Medical research facilities need test subjects. Organ harvesting operations need donors. Labor camps need workers. The demand is incredible, and the supply, while plentiful, requires someone with particular skills to secure. Former military, combat trained. Someone who can move through dangerous territory and extract targets. You're perfect. You want me to kidnap survivors and sell them. I want you to survive. Everything else is just business. Your alternative is to die out there with everyone else when the government runs out of patience and decides to sterilize the city. Because that's coming, Staff Sergeant. You know it. I know it. They can't contain this. So they'll burn it all down and call it victory. Unless you're with me, unless you're smart enough to see that the old rules don't apply anymore. I considered shooting him right there. Would have been easy. But his men would gun me down before I got the second shot, and Rachel and the others were outside. They'd be caught in the crossfire, so I lowered the Glock slowly. I need time to think. You have 24 hours. Come back tomorrow, same time with your answer. If you agree, you get all these supplies. If you refuse, He gestured around. Well, you'll find that surviving without resources is very difficult, and I'll find someone else to do the job. What's stopping me from just taking the supplies now? Besides my men and their rifles, nothing. But you're smarter than that. You know this is a negotiation. I need you. You need me. We can help each other. Think about it. I backed toward the door, keeping my weapon ready. His men didn't move. The door rolled up and I stepped out into the daylight. It slammed down behind me. Rachel and the others were waiting by the truck, weapons drawn, looking terrified. "What happened?" Rachel demanded. "We're leaving, now." We drove away from the port in silence. I could feel everyone's eyes on me, waiting for an explanation. But I didn't have one I was ready to give. Omar Bashir, terrorist financier turned apocalypse profiteer. The kind of man who saw opportunity in mass death. The kind of man who would absolutely follow through on his threats. And he had resources we desperately needed. But working for him meant becoming him. Meant crossing a line I'd never crossed even in combat. Kidnapping civilians, selling them to be experimented on or harvested for parts. It was unconscionable. Unthinkable. Except we were running out of food, running out of water, running out of time. And Bashir knew it. That's why he'd made the offer. Because he knew I'd consider it. Because in the apocalypse, morality became a luxury most people couldn't afford. We made it back to my apartment just before dark. The building was no longer quiet. I could hear sounds from other apartments. People talking, arguing, crying. Other survivors holding on by their fingernails. We went inside and locked the door, and I finally told the group what had happened. Who Bashir was, what he'd offered, what it would cost. "You can't be serious," Rachel said immediately. "Derek, you can't work for that monster." "I'm not saying I will. I'm saying we need to consider every option." "Every option doesn't include kidnapping people." "She's right," Dr. Vikram said. "There has to be another way. We can scavenge, make supply runs, find other survivor groups. And when we run into Bashir's people doing the same thing, what then? We fight them? With what? My handgun and kitchen knives?" I shook my head. "I'm not saying we do it. I'm saying we need to think strategically about survival." "There's survival and then there's staying human," Jennifer said quietly. "If we do what he wants, we might as well be infected. We'll have lost what makes us people." They were right, all of them, but that didn't change the math. We needed resources, and Bashir had them. The question was whether we were willing to pay his price or find another way. And with the clock ticking down on when the government would write off Houston completely, we were running out of time to decide. That night I took first watch, sat at the window with the Glock in my lap, and watched the city continue to burn. The infected roamed the streets below, drawn to sounds and movement, hunting anything living. I counted 15 of them in just the 2 blocks I could see clearly. Tomorrow there'd be more. Every day the numbers grew as more people died and came back. Eventually there'd be more infected than living. Eventually this whole city would be one giant horde, and then the bombs would fall. I thought about my training, all those years in the Rangers learning to fight and survive and protect. All that time in hostile territory watching my brothers die for a mission most people back home didn't understand or care about. What was it all for if I couldn't even protect my own sister when it mattered? What good was any of it if the apocalypse came and I ended up working for a terrorist kidnapping innocent people? My phone buzzed, another text from Bashir's number. "TikTok Staff Sergeant, the world doesn't wait for moral debates." I deleted the message, then I checked my supplies. 4 magazines left for the Glock, maybe 60 rounds total. Not enough. Food for 3 days if we rationed hard, water for 2, medical supplies running low. The others were counting on me to have a plan, to lead them to safety, to be the soldier who knew what to do in a crisis. But I had no plan. I had no answers. I had nothing but the growing certainty that we were all going to die here. Rachel relieved me around 2 a.m. She sat down in the chair by the window and I moved to the couch. "You gonna do it?" she asked quietly. "Work for him?" "I don't know." "Yes, you do. I can see it in your face. You're already planning how to justify it. What do you want me to say? That I'm going to let you starve because I'm too proud to compromise? I want you to say you won't become a monster to fight monsters. I want you to be my brother, not some mercenary working for a terrorist. Your brother's trying to keep you alive. Then keep me alive the right way. Please, Derek, we'll find another option. We have to. I didn't answer, because the truth was I was already half convinced, already running calculations in my head about how many people I'd have to turn over to Bashir to get enough supplies to keep my group alive. Already drawing the line between acceptable losses and unacceptable ones, and finding that line got blurrier every hour. That's what the apocalypse did to you. It eroded everything you thought you believed until only survival remained, naked and honest and ugly. Dawn came, and with it, more bad news. The radio, still functioning on battery power, carried emergency broadcasts from what was left of the government. Houston was lost. The infection had spread beyond containment. The president had authorized military action to prevent further spread. Evacuations were no longer possible. Anyone still in the Houston metro area was advised to find shelter immediately. Airstrikes would commence in 72 hours. They called it Operation Cleansing Fire. I called it genocide by bureaucracy. 3 days. We had 3 days to get out of the city or die with everyone else. I gathered the group and laid it out. We need transportation that can handle all of us, plus supplies. We need weapons and ammunition. We need food and water for at least a week. We need all of this in the next 48 hours because on the third day we move, we head north, and we don't stop until we're outside the blast radius. The blast radius, Michelle repeated. You mean they're going to nuke us? Maybe not nuclear, but thermobaric weapons, fuel-air explosives, something big enough to level the city and kill everything in it, including the infected. And how do we get these supplies? Sarah asked. I didn't answer right away. They all knew. They could see it in my face. No, Rachel said. Derek, no. It's the only way. It's not. We can scavenge, we can raid stores, we can die trying. Or we can make a deal with Bashir, get the supplies we need, and get out. Then once we're safe, we figure out how to take him down. You really think he'll just let us leave? I think he'll be too busy running his operation to chase after one small group. We're not his priority. We get the supplies, we get out, we live. That's all that matters. The group debated for an hour. Voices raised, accusations thrown, moral lines drawn and redrawn. In the end, it came down to a vote again, 4-2 in favor of accepting Bashir's offer. Rachel and Jennifer against. I hated that Rachel was on the losing side, but democracy was democracy, even when it condemned you. I texted Bashir, I'm in. What do you need me to do? His response came within minutes. Good choice. Target is a group of survivors holed up in an office building downtown. 20 people, mostly professionals, healthy, uninfected. Deliver them to the port warehouse by midnight tonight. Payment upon delivery. Don't disappoint me. An address followed, an office building I recognized, a high-rise near the business district. 20 people, 20 lives, 20 strangers who didn't deserve what was about to happen to them. But Rachel did deserve to live. The others in my group deserved to live, and I was the one who had to make the call. I need to do this alone, I said. The rest of you stay here. If I'm not back by morning, take the truck and head north. I'm coming with you, Rachel said. No. You don't get to decide that. You're my brother, and if you're going to do this, you're not doing it alone. I wanted to argue, but didn't have the energy. Fine, everyone else stays here. Rachel and I will be back before midnight. We left at sunset. The streets were a nightmare of abandoned cars and bodies, and infected that came out of nowhere, drawn by sound or movement or just random chance. I'd found a tire iron in my truck's toolkit and gave it to Rachel. Not much, but better than nothing. We moved carefully, staying quiet, avoiding main roads, using alleys and side streets to navigate toward downtown. The office building was 15 stories of glass and steel that had probably housed hundreds of people before the outbreak. Now it was dark except for scattered lights on upper floors where survivors had barricaded themselves. Getting in would be the easy part. Getting 20 people out without alerting the infected would be impossible, which meant I needed a different approach. We found a service entrance on the side of the building. I jimmied the lock with a knife and we slipped inside. The lobby was trashed, furniture overturned, glass shattered, blood everywhere. We found the stairwell and started climbing. Rachel behind me, breathing hard, the tire iron clutched in both hands. 10th floor, that's where the lights were concentrated. I pushed through the stairwell door and found myself in an office space that had been converted into a survival camp. Desks pushed together for barricades. conference rooms turned into sleeping quarters. A makeshift infirmary set up in what used to be the break room, and people, 20 of them, just like Bashir said. They looked at us with hope and fear mixed together, two strangers emerging from the stairwell with weapons. A man stepped forward, mid-40s, wearing a suit that had seen better days. "Who are you?" "Derek Woods, Army Rangers. I'm here to help evacuate you to a secure location." The hope in their faces intensified. "Thank God. We've been trapped here for 3 days. The infected are everywhere below the 8th floor. We tried calling for help, but no one answered." I answered, "But we need to move fast. Airstrikes are coming in less than 3 days. If we're not out of the city by then, we're dead." They scrambled to gather belongings. I let them, made it seem real, gave them hope. And all the while, I was calculating how to get them to the port without them realizing they were being delivered into slavery. The guilt sat in my stomach like a stone, heavy and cold. Rachel pulled me aside. "What's the plan?" "I don't know yet." "You're really going to do this? Do you see another option?" She looked at the people packing their lives into bags and briefcases. "They trust you. They think you're saving them." "Maybe I am. Maybe wherever Bashir takes them is better than dying here." "You don't believe that." She was right. I didn't. But I was going to do it anyway because the alternative was watching her die, and that was unacceptable. We moved as a group down the stairs and out through the service entrance. 22 people now, counting Rachel and me. Too many, too slow, too loud. The infected noticed immediately. They came from everywhere, drawn by the sound of footsteps and voices. I fired the Glock, dropping them one by one, but there were too many, always too many. "Run!" I shouted. "Everyone run toward the port!" They ran, civilians with no training, panicked and desperate, scattering in every direction. Rachel and I tried to keep them together, but it was like herding cats in a thunderstorm. Infected grabbed stragglers, pulled them down. We lost 3 people in the first block, 4 in the second. I shot infected until my magazine ran dry, then reloaded and kept shooting. My last magazine. After this, I had nothing. We made it to the port with 13 people left. 7 had been killed or scattered during the escape. The warehouse door was open, and Bashir stood there with his men, watching us stagger toward him covered in blood and exhaustion. "Staff Sergeant Woods, well done. A bit fewer than promised, but acceptable given the circumstances." The survivors looked at me, confused. "What's he talking about?" I couldn't meet their eyes. "I'm sorry." Bashir's men moved forward, weapons raised, corralling the survivors like cattle. They screamed at me, cursed me, begged me. Rachel was staring at me like she didn't know who I was. Maybe she didn't. Maybe I didn't know either. "Your payment," Bashir said, gesturing to a pallet of supplies inside the warehouse. Weapons, ammunition, food, water, medical supplies. Everything we needed to survive. I walked past the screaming survivors and into the warehouse. Started loading supplies into my truck. Didn't look back. Couldn't look back. This was survival. This was what it took. "Keep telling yourself that," a voice in my head whispered. "Maybe eventually you'll believe it." Rachel didn't help me load. She stood by the truck staring at nothing while Bashir's men forced the survivors into the back of a semi-truck. One of them, the man in the suit who'd been so grateful when I showed up, broke free and ran toward me. "Please, you're a soldier. You're supposed to protect people." One of Bashir's guards shot him, not killed him, just wounded, a shot to the leg. He went down screaming. They dragged him back to the truck. "Your services were satisfactory," Bashir said as I finished loading. "I have another job if you're interested. Larger group, better pay." "No," I said. The word came out harsh. "This was one time. That's it." "Of course. But if you change your mind, you know how to reach me. Good luck surviving the cleansing, Staff Sergeant." I got in the truck. Rachel climbed in beside me. We drove away from the port in silence. Behind us, the survivors' screams faded into the distance. I'd saved my group by condemning strangers. That was the math of survival. That was the new world order. I told myself I'd had no choice. I told myself I'd done what was necessary. I told myself a lot of things. None of them made me feel any less like a monster. We got back to the apartment and unloaded the supplies. The others saw what we'd brought back and celebrated briefly before noticing our faces. They asked what happened. I told them. Their celebration died. We'd crossed the line. We were on the other side now, not quite monsters, but not quite human either. Survival had a price, and we'd paid it in full. That night I couldn't sleep, kept seeing the faces of those people, kept hearing their screams, kept feeling Rachel's eyes on me, disappointed and disgusted. I'd been in combat zones where I'd killed enemy combatants and never lost sleep over it. They'd been trying to kill me or my men. It was war. It was justified. But this was different. This was evil wearing the mask of necessity. Around 3 a.m., Rachel came and sat next to me. We didn't speak for a long time. Finally, she said, "We're going to kill him." "What?" "Bashir, we're going to kill him. That's the only way to make this right." "Rachel, don't argue. Don't tell me it's too dangerous or that we should just escape and forget about it. We did this. We have to fix it. Otherwise, what's the point of surviving?" She was right. I knew she was right. But going after Bashir meant risking everything. He had men, weapons, resources. We had determination and guilt. Not exactly even odds. "We have 2 days before the airstrikes," I said. "If we're going to do this, we need a plan." "Then let's make one." We spent the rest of the night planning. Dr. Vikram and the others joined in, all of them feeling the same guilt, the same need to make this right. We weren't soldiers. We weren't heroes. We were just people trying to find redemption in a world that had stopped offering it. But maybe that was enough. The plan was simple and probably suicidal. We'd go back to the port, find where Bashir was keeping the prisoners, free them, kill Bashir and his men, get everyone out of the city before the bombs dropped. Simple in theory. In practice, it was a dozen ways to die messily. But it was also the right thing to do. And that counted for something. We gathered what weapons we had. The guns and ammunition from Bashir's payment. Ironic how his own supplies would be used against him. A few makeshift weapons, pipes, and tools from the apartment. Not much, but more than we'd had before. We loaded everything into the truck and prepared to move out. "This is probably a one-way trip," I told the group. "Anyone wants to stay behind? No judgment. Take your share of supplies and head north. You'll have a better chance alone than with us." No one moved. They all wanted to come. They all wanted to try to fix what we'd broken. "All right then," I said, "let's go kill a terrorist." We left the apartment for the last time, drove through Houston one final time, past streets I'd known my whole life, past landmarks that were now just ruins, past thousands of infected roaming in packs hunting for prey. The city was beyond saving. The bombs would fall tomorrow night. But maybe if we succeeded, we could save the people we condemned. Maybe that would be enough. The port was crawling with infected by the time we arrived. They'd spread throughout the industrial district, drawn by something, maybe the smell of living humans in Bashir's warehouse. We had to fight our way through just to get close, burning through ammunition at an unsustainable rate. But we'd made it this far. No turning back now. Bashir's warehouse was locked down tight. Guards on the outside, more inside probably. We needed a distraction. I sent Jennifer and Michelle around to the far side with instructions to make noise, draw the guards away. The rest of us stacked up at the main entrance, weapons ready, hearts pounding. The distraction worked. Guards ran toward the sound of breaking glass and shouting. We rushed the entrance. I shot the remaining guard before he could raise an alarm. We moved inside fast and quiet, clearing corners, checking angles, staying tactical despite being amateurs with guns. The prisoners were in the back, locked in a shipping container, all 13 of them, huddled together, some injured, all terrified. Rachel worked on the lock while Dr. Vikram and I covered the door. It took too long. Guards were coming back. I could hear them shouting, searching, hunting for us. "Got it." Rachel pulled the container open. The survivors poured out, weak and confused, but alive. "Out the back," I ordered. "There's a loading dock on the east side. Go now, run, don't stop." They ran. We covered their escape, trading shots with Bashir's men as they converged on our position. Sarah went down, hit in the chest. Dr. Vikram tried to help her, but she was gone before she hit the ground. Another loss, another name added to the list of people who died because of decisions I'd made. We fell back toward the loading dock. Jennifer and Michelle rejoined us, both wounded but mobile. 6 of us left from the original group. We'd lost too many, but the prisoners were escaping. That was something. Bashir appeared from a side office flanked by his remaining guards. He saw what was happening and his face twisted with rage. "You ungrateful piece of shit. I gave you a chance to survive." "You gave me a chance to become like you," I shouted back. "I'm done." He raised a pistol. I was faster. 3 shots, center mass. He staggered but didn't fall. Body armor. His guards opened fire. We scattered, using containers and equipment for cover. Bullets sparked off metal. Someone screamed. I couldn't tell who. Everything devolved into chaos and gunfire and desperation. I flanked around a stack of crates, came up behind one of the guards, and put him down with a close-range headshot. Then another. Bashir was reloading, hands shaking, body armor cracked from my earlier shots. He saw me coming and tried to run. I chased him deeper into the warehouse, past pallets and machinery, into a section that stank of rot and chemicals. He stumbled into what looked like a meat processing area, the kind of place that used to handle shipments before the world ended. Now it was just rust and old blood and hooks hanging from chains, fitting place for a man who trafficked in human cargo. "Please," he said, backing against a wall. "I can pay you. I have resources, connections. We can work together. I don't work with terrorists." Everyone is a terrorist when the world ends. There's no good guys anymore, just survivors and corpses. Maybe he was right, but that did mean I had to let him keep surviving. I dropped my empty Glock and pulled the knife from my belt. A fixed blade I'd carried through 3 deployments. It had killed enemy combatants in close-quarters combat. Now it would kill a man who trafficked in human misery. He tried to run. I caught him, slammed him against a wall, drove the knife into his gut and twisted. He screamed. I pulled the knife out and did it again and again. Long past when he stopped moving. Long past when he was dead. I couldn't stop. All the rage and guilt and self-hatred poured out through the knife until finally Rachel grabbed my arm. "He's dead, Derek. He's dead. We have to go. Now." I looked down at what was left of Bashir, barely recognizable as human. I'd destroyed him as thoroughly as he'd destroyed those lives, eye for an eye. It didn't make me feel better. Nothing would make me feel better. But he was gone, and that was something. We found the others at the loading dock. 4 of us left now. Dr. Vikram had taken a bullet to the shoulder but was mobile. Jennifer had a gash across her face from shrapnel. Rachel and I were miraculously uninjured, at least physically. The prisoners were scattered into the port, running for their lives. We'd freed them but couldn't save them. That would have to be enough. We made it back to the truck and drove north, away from Houston, away from the infected and the chaos and the impending airstrikes. Behind us, the city burned. Tomorrow it would burn hotter. Tomorrow it would burn completely. The government's solution to an unsolvable problem: erase everything and everyone, infected and uninfected alike. Call it a victory. Call it necessary. Call it anything except what it was: mass murder disguised as policy. We drove through the night, past other refugees fleeing north, heading for checkpoints that probably didn't exist anymore, hoping for salvation that wasn't coming. The roads were clogged with abandoned vehicles and bodies. Some of the bodies were still moving, infected, wandering aimlessly, spreading the virus north with every step. The containment had failed. The infection was spreading beyond Houston. Eventually, it would be everywhere. Eventually, the whole world would look like what Houston looked like now. Around dawn, we stopped at an abandoned gas station to rest and reassess. We'd made it about 50 miles north, not enough. The blast radius would extend far beyond that. We needed another 50 miles minimum, but we were exhausted, running on adrenaline and fear, and we needed sleep. Rachel took first watch while the rest of us crashed in the truck or on the ground beside it. I dreamed of Bashir's face, of the 13 people I'd sold into slavery, of Sarah dying on the warehouse floor. Woke up gasping and covered in sweat to find it was midday and Rachel was shaking me. "Derek, you need to see this." I followed her to the gas station's roof where she'd climbed to get a vantage point. She handed me binoculars and pointed south. I looked and felt my stomach drop. The horizon was dark with smoke, not the scattered fires of looting and chaos. This was organized, systematic. I could see military aircraft in the distance, flying in formation, bombers. They were starting early. Maybe the infection had spread faster than they had anticipated. Maybe they'd decided not to wait. Either way, Houston was about to cease to exist. "How long do we have?" Rachel asked. I checked my watch. 1,400 hours. If they're starting now, maybe 6 hours before the main strike. We need to move, now. We woke the others and got back on the road, pushed the truck as fast as we dared on roads that were barely roads anymore. We passed through small towns that had been overrun by infected, past military checkpoints that had been abandoned, past refugee camps that had turned into slaughterhouses. The infection was everywhere. The bombs would fall on Houston, but the virus would survive. It always did. That's what made it perfect biological warfare. Self-replicating, self-spreading, unstoppable. By late afternoon, we'd made it about 75 miles from downtown Houston. Still not far enough, but we had no choice. The truck was running on fumes. We found an old farmhouse set back from the highway and pulled in. The place was abandoned, but intact. We fortified as best we could, boarding up windows, locking doors, preparing for what was coming. The sun was setting when we heard the sound, a low rumble that grew louder, felt in your chest before your ears registered it. I climbed onto the farmhouse roof and looked south. The sky was bright, not with sunset, but with fire. Multiple strikes hitting simultaneously. Thermobaric weapons, fuel-air explosives that sucked the oxygen out of the air and created pressure waves that could collapse lungs from a mile away. They lit up the horizon like a second sun, mushroom clouds rising in sequence as bomber after bomber unleashed their payloads. Houston was dying. Millions of people, infected and otherwise, were dying. The medical center where I'd rescued Rachel, the office building where I'd found the survivors, the port where I'd killed Bashir, my apartment in Montrose, my childhood home in the Heights, Marcus's house in Katy, all of it turning to ash and vapor and memory. Rachel came up and stood beside me. We watched our city die in silence. What was there to say? Words felt inadequate, empty. We'd survived, but at what cost? And for how long? The infection was spreading. The bombs would fall on other cities soon. Dallas, Austin, San Antonio. Eventually the whole country. Eventually the whole world. This was the beginning of the end, and we were witnessing it in real time. The shockwaves reached us about 20 minutes after the first strikes. Windows shattered, the ground shook. The air tasted like ash and chemicals. We huddled in the farmhouse basement, covering our ears, praying the structure would hold. It did. Barely. When the shaking stopped and we emerged, the world had changed color. Everything was gray with fallout and ash. The sky was dark even though it was early evening. The temperature had dropped 10 degrees. Nuclear winter wasn't quite accurate, but close enough. We spent that night in the farmhouse, taking turns on watch, rationing our remaining supplies. Dr. Vikram was feverish from his gunshot wound. Jennifer's face wound had gotten infected. We had medical supplies, but no expertise beyond basic first aid. They needed real doctors, real hospitals. Those didn't exist anymore. Around midnight, I heard something outside. Movement in the darkness. I grabbed a rifle and went to investigate. Found a group of infected stumbling through the farmyard, drawn by light or sound or just random chance. At least a dozen of them. They hadn't noticed us yet. I went back inside and alerted the others. "We can't stay here," I said. They're coming. "We're not ready to move," Dr. Vikram said through gritted teeth. His shoulder wound was bad and getting worse. "I need rest. We all do. Rest when you're dead. We go now or we don't go at all." We gathered our supplies in a frantic rush, loaded what we could. Carry, left the rest. The infected were at the door by the time we reached the truck, pounding on wood, moaning in that horrible chorus that sent chills down your spine. We piled in, and I started the engine. It coughed, sputtered, died. I tried again. Same result. The fuel gauge read empty. We'd run out of gas. "Out of the truck," I ordered. "We go on foot. Stay together. Stay quiet. Move." We ran into the darkness with infected behind us and nowhere to go but forward. The farmhouse lights disappeared behind us as we fled into fields and woods, following the highway north by moonlight and instinct. We lost Dr. Vikram after about an hour. He couldn't keep pace with his wounded shoulder and infection setting in. He fell behind and the horde caught him. His screams echoed through the night until they suddenly stopped. Another name on the list. Jennifer didn't make it to dawn. The infection in her face wound had spread to her bloodstream. She developed a fever and then seizures, and then she stopped moving altogether. We left her body in a ditch beside the road and kept walking. 3 of us left. Rachel, me, and Michelle. 3 out of 9. The math of survival continued to get worse. We walked for 2 days, scavenged food and water from abandoned cars and houses, avoided infected and survivors alike. The highways heading north were clogged with refugees, thousands of people fleeing the destroyed cities, spreading the infection to every town they passed through. The quarantine had failed. The bombs had failed. Nothing could stop the virus now. It was everywhere, and it was winning. On the 3rd day, we reached a town called Huntsville, about 75 miles north of Houston. It was chaos, military and police trying to maintain order while infected roamed the streets, and refugees poured in by the thousands. Gunfire echoed constantly. Fires burned unchecked. We pushed through the crowds looking for supplies, for shelter, for any sign that civilization still existed in some form. We found a sporting goods store that had been looted but not completely emptied, grabbed what we could, camping supplies, some food, bottled water, ammunition for weapons we'd long since run dry. It wasn't much, but it was something. We were loading our packs when we heard screaming outside. The infected had broken through the town's defenses. They came in a wave, hundreds of them, overwhelming the police and military by sheer numbers. The battle lasted maybe 30 minutes before the defenders broke and ran. The town fell. We watched from our hiding spot in the store's back room as infected flooded the streets, pulled people from cars and houses, spread the virus further. "We can't stay here," Michelle whispered. "We can't go out there either," Rachel said. We were trapped. The store had one exit and it was blocked by infected. We had maybe 2 days of food and water, no way to call for help, no cavalry coming. We'd survived the outbreak, survived the terrorists, survived the bombing of Houston, and now we were going to die in a sporting goods store in Huntsville, Texas. The cosmic joke of it wasn't lost on me. Hours passed. The infected outside showed no signs of leaving. They wandered aimlessly, hunting for prey, drawn by sounds we couldn't hear, and motivations we didn't understand. Night fell, and we huddled in the darkness, too afraid to use lights, too exhausted to stay fully alert. Michelle fell asleep. Rachel sat beside me, her head on my shoulder, breathing steady but tense. "I'm sorry," I said quietly. "For what?" "All of it. Getting you into this. The deal with Bashir, not getting us out sooner. You did your best. You saved my life multiple times." "For how much longer, though? We're trapped here with no way out, and it's my fault." "Derek." She lifted her head and looked at me in the darkness. "It's not your fault the world ended. You did what you thought was right. You made hard choices. That's all anyone can do. Whatever happens next, at least we're together. That's something." I wanted to believe her, wanted to think that trying counted for something. But everywhere I looked, I saw failure, people I couldn't save, decisions I couldn't unmake, a world I couldn't fix. The Army had trained me to accomplish missions against impossible odds. But there was no training for this, no manual for surviving the apocalypse. Just instinct and luck, and we were running low on both. Around midnight, something changed. The infected outside started moving in one direction, all at once, like they'd received a signal. Within minutes, the street in front of the store was empty. Through the shattered windows, I could see them heading east, toward some destination or sound that drew them like moths to flame. It was our chance. "We go now," I said. "Move quiet, move fast, don't look back." We slipped out of the store and into the street. Bodies everywhere, the remains of Huntsville's last stand. We picked our way through the carnage, heading north again, always north, following the highway out of town and back into rural Texas. Behind us, Huntsville burned, another city lost, another failure added to the growing list. We walked through the night and into the next day. Exhaustion was a constant companion now, dragging at every step. My feet were blistered and bleeding, my water was nearly gone. But we kept walking because stopping meant dying, and I wasn't ready to die yet. None of us were. Late afternoon on the 4th day after Houston's destruction, we crested a hill and saw something that made us stop in our tracks. A military convoy, at least 30 vehicles, setting up a checkpoint on the highway ahead. Real military, not scattered survivors playing soldier. They had armor and weapons and organization. They had helicopter support. They had what looked like a functioning command structure. It was the first sign of actual civilization we'd seen in days. We approached slowly, hands visible, making no sudden movements. Soldiers saw us coming and raised weapons, shouted at us to stop, to identify ourselves, to prove we weren't infected. I complied with everything they asked, showed my military ID, explained who we were and where we'd come from. They listened with the kind of exhausted skepticism that came from hearing too many stories of survival and seeing too much death. They put us through decontamination, hosed us down with chemicals that burned our skin and eyes, took blood samples to check for infection, quarantined us for 24 hours to watch for symptoms. Standard procedure in a world where anyone could turn at any moment. We didn't complain. We were alive. That was more than most people could say. A captain came to debrief us after we passed the quarantine period. I told him everything, leaving out some details but hitting the important points. Houston had fallen. The infection was spreading faster than containment efforts. Terrorists had been involved in the initial outbreak. I'd killed one of them, a man named Omar Bashir. The captain listened and took notes and didn't seem surprised by any of it. Houston's gone, he confirmed. We leveled it 2 days ago. Thermobaric strikes across the entire metro area. Nothing survived. Dallas and Austin are next if we can't contain the spread. Right now, we're falling back to establish a new defensive perimeter along I-20. Everything south of that line is considered lost. What about north? Rachel asked. What about the rest of the country? The captain's expression said everything before he spoke. Scattered outbreaks in major cities across the U.S. International reports of similar incidents in Europe and Asia. Best guess from command is that this was a coordinated attack using Houston as the test case. Multiple terrorist cells releasing the virus simultaneously worldwide. We're looking at a global pandemic that can't be contained through conventional means. So what are you doing here? I asked. What we're ordered to do. Hold the line. Evacuate civilians when possible. Eliminate infected when necessary. Buy time for the real solution. What solution? Above my pay grade, Staff Sergeant, but they're working on something. They have to be. Otherwise, what's the point of any of this? He was right. There had to be hope. Had to be some plan to turn this around. Otherwise, we were just delaying the inevitable, watching humanity die by inches instead of all at once. But I'd seen enough of how governments handle crises to be skeptical. They talked big and acted small, made promises they couldn't keep, declared victory when defeat was obvious. Maybe this time would be different. Maybe. They assigned us to a refugee camp about 10 miles behind the defensive line. Tents and trucks and temporary structures housing thousands of survivors from Houston and surrounding areas. It was crowded and dirty and probably a disease vector waiting to happen, but it had food and water and medical care. Michelle's wound was finally treated properly by an army medic. Rachel got to sleep in an actual bed instead of on the ground. I got a new set of clothes to replace the blood-soaked ones I've been wearing since the port. We spent 3 days at the camp while the military finalized their defensive positions. During that time, I watched the news on a battered TV someone had hooked up to a generator. The reports were grim. New York had fallen. Los Angeles was under siege. Chicago was burning. International footage showed London overrun, Paris evacuating, Tokyo implementing martial law. The virus was everywhere. The infection rate was exponential. Models predicted 90% of the global population would be infected or dead within 6 months. The world was ending. Not with a bang or whimper, but with teeth and hunger and the mindless drive to consume. Everything humanity had built over 10,000 years of civilization was collapsing in real time, and we were just watching it happen, helpless to stop the tide. On the 4th day, the camp came under attack. Not infected humans. A group of raiders from a town we'd overrun earlier, desperate for supplies, armed with whatever weapons they'd scavenged. They hit us at dawn, overwhelming the guards with numbers and surprise. The camp dissolved into chaos, people running, screaming, fighting, tents burning, supplies being stolen. I grabbed Rachel and Michelle, and we ran for the tree line, not because I had a plan, but because staying meant dying. We made it to the woods and found a group of about 15 other refugees who'd had the same idea. Among them was a young woman clutching a baby, a couple of teenagers who looked shell-shocked, an older man with a hunting rifle, and a handful of others I didn't bother learning names for. Experience had taught me that learning names just made it hurt more when they died. "We need to keep moving," I said. "Head north and west. Get away from the highways. Find somewhere rural and defensible." "What makes you think anywhere's safe?" the old man with the rifle asked. "I don't, but standing here discussing it definitely isn't safe." We moved out, a ragged group of survivors with no plan and little hope. Behind us, the camp continued to burn. Another loss, another setback. But we were alive, and that counted for something, even if I was having trouble remembering what. We walked for 2 more days before we found it. An old industrial complex set back from any main roads, probably a manufacturing plant or warehouse from decades past, now abandoned and overgrown. It had high fences, intact structures, and only one easily defensible access point. It wasn't perfect, but it was better than being exposed. We claimed it, cleared out the few infected we found inside, and set up a new base. That was 3 weeks ago. Since then, the group has grown to about 40 people. Refugees from the camps, survivors from small towns overrun by the infection, people attracted to the rumor of a safe place. We've fortified the complex as best we can, set up a garden to grow food, organize scavenging runs for supplies, established rules and watch rotations, created the illusion of civilization in a world that had forgotten what civilization looked like. Rachel and I are still alive. Michelle died 2 weeks ago from complications with her injuries. Most of the original group from Houston is gone, replaced by new faces I try not to get too attached to. The infected continue to multiply. Every day there are more of them and fewer of us. The military's defensive line collapsed last week. We saw the helicopters flying north, evacuating command personnel, abandoning everyone else. The government's solution had been to run and hide and wait for someone else to fix the problem. But no one was fixing it. The virus spread. The infected spread. Cities fell one after another like dominoes. The news broadcast stopped about 10 days ago, just static now on every channel. Either the infrastructure collapsed or there was no one left alive to broadcast. Either way, the result was the same. We were alone. I'm writing this down because someone needs to remember how it happened, how the world ended, how we tried to survive and mostly failed, how ordinary people made terrible choices trying to protect the people they loved, how none of it mattered in the end because the apocalypse didn't care about good intentions or hard choices or any of the things we told ourselves to sleep at night. Omar Bashir is dead. I killed him with a knife in a meat processing plant and felt nothing but rage and guilt. But his virus, his weapon, his legacy continues to spread. He won. The terrorists won. The world they wanted to destroy is destroyed. And I can't even hate them for it anymore because hate requires energy I don't have. The infected are at the fence again. They come every night now, drawn by something, maybe the smell of living humans, maybe just random chance. We have ammunition for maybe 3 more days of fighting them off. After that, we use what melee weapons we have. After that, we use our hands and hope. After that, we die. Rachel is asleep in the corner. She doesn't know I'm writing this. Doesn't know I've been planning to leave before the ammunition runs out, before this place falls, before she has to watch me turn into one of them. She'd try to stop me if she knew, try to convince me there's still a chance. But I've seen the odds, calculated the supply rates, watched the infected multiply while we diminish. There's no chance. There's just borrowed time, and we've borrowed all we can. The sun is starting to rise. The infected are pulling back into the shadows. They don't like daylight, or maybe they've just learned we're more active during the day and they're conserving energy. Smart predators, efficient killers, everything humans were before we invented morality and ethics and all the other things that made us weak enough to lose. I can hear helicopters in the distance. Military, probably. Last evacuation runs before they abandon this sector completely. They're not coming for us. We're not important enough. We're just statistics. In a report someone will file and no one will read. Acceptable losses, collateral damage, the price of doing business in the apocalypse. This is Derek Woods, Staff Sergeant, 75th Ranger Regiment. If anyone finds this, if anyone is still alive to read it, know that we tried. Know that we fought. Know that it didn't matter. The zombies won. The world ended. And all the training and all the weapons and all the desperate deals with terrorists couldn't change. That simple fact. Tell my mother I'm sorry I couldn't protect her. Tell Marcus I hope he made it out of Katie. Tell Rachel. The explosion cuts through the morning silence. I drop the pen and grab my rifle, sprint outside to find the fence breached, infected pouring through a gap that shouldn't exist. Someone must have weakened the structure during the night. Sabotage. Or just entropy. The complex is being overrun. Everyone to the center building. Fall back! Fall back! I'm shouting, but can barely hear my own voice over the screams. People running, infected chasing, blood everywhere already. How did it happen so fast? Rachel emerges from the building, sees me, sees the breach, understands immediately. Derek, get inside, barricade the doors, I'll buy you time. I stand at the gap and open fire. Controlled bursts, headshots. The rifle kicks against my shoulder. Brass casings rain around my feet. Bodies drop. More keep coming. Always more. My magazine runs dry. I reload. Last magazine. This is it. This is the end I saw coming, but hoped would take longer to arrive. The rifle clicks empty. I drop it and draw my knife. The first infected reaches me and I sidestep. Drive the blade through its eye socket, push it away, turn to face the next one. There are too many. Way too many. Hands grab me. Teeth tear at my clothes. I'm fighting but losing. Going down under the weight of bodies. Pain explodes in my shoulder as teeth sink through muscle. I scream. More pain. My leg, my side. They're tearing into me from every direction. I can see Rachel in the doorway of the building, being pulled back by survivors, screaming my name. I try to tell her to run, to survive, to forgive me for every mistake I made, but my throat won't work. Blood fills my mouth. The sky above is blue and clear. Beautiful. Strange to notice beauty while dying. Strange to feel almost peaceful as the infection burns through my bloodstream, shutting down my higher functions, erasing everything that made me human. I can feel it happening. Can feel myself slipping away. Derek Woods is dying. Something else is being born. My last coherent thought is simple and true. We never had a chance. Then darkness, then hunger, then nothing but the drive to feed. Above, the helicopters circle once and fly away, heading north, where they'll find more survivors, more desperate people clinging to hope, more future corpses trying to delay the inevitable. Behind them, Houston's radioactive crater still glows on the southern horizon. Around them, the infection spreads. Below them, the complex falls. Just one more loss in a war humanity stopped winning the moment the first victim bit the first victim. The zombies prevail. They always do. That's the math of a perfect bioweapon. Exponential spread. No cure. No containment, just consumption. The world ends not with a bang, but with teeth and hunger, and the final realization that all our technology, all our weapons, all our civilization was just a thin veneer over the same brutal truth that's governed life since the beginning. Eat or be eaten, survive or die, fight or fall, we fell. The sun rises over Texas, illuminating a landscape transformed. Burning cities, empty roads, bodies in the streets, and shambling through it all, the infected, the turned, the dead who won't die. Spreading the virus further with every step, consuming everything in their path, unstoppable and infinite and victorious. This is the end. This is how humanity dies. Not gloriously in battle, not peacefully in sleep, but torn apart by its own weaponized hubris, by terrorists who saw opportunity in science's ambition, by governments who chose destruction over containment, by people like me who made terrible choices and called them survival. Omar Bashir's legacy lives on in every infected body. The T-virus continues its work, rewriting biology, destroying consciousness, creating monsters from men. And somewhere in the ruins, a few survivors still fight, still hope, still believe rescue is coming. It isn't. The thermobaric strikes continue. Dallas burns, Austin burns, Atlanta, Boston, Seattle, all burning. The government's solution to the virus is scorched earth, kill everything and hope the ashes don't reanimate. But they do. They always do. The virus survives in the soil, in the water, in the air itself. There is no killing it. There is only delay. And delay is running out. This is Staff Sergeant Derek Woods, last transmission, final report. Mission failed. Objective lost. Personnel deceased or compromised. Recommend immediate evacuation of all remaining civilian population centers and implementation of Protocol Omega, if such exists. Probability of human survival, near zero. Probability of viral containment, impossible. The apocalypse isn't coming. It's here, and we lost. By dawn, the border area was completely overrun. The things, the infected, whatever they were, had broken through every defensive line. The living were fleeing north in cars, on foot, any way they could. The military had established a new perimeter along the I-5 trying to contain the spread, but it was too late. The infection was already inside San Diego. We'd pulled back to Camp Pendleton, regrouping, trying to figure out what the hell was happening. I sat in a mess tent, drinking bitter coffee, my hands shaking from exhaustion and adrenaline. Lieutenant Morrison gathered us for a briefing. His face was grim. He told us that the same thing was happening all along the border, that this wasn't just Tijuana, it was everywhere from Brownsville to Tijuana to Mexicali. Some kind of infection, rabies or something like it, but faster, more aggressive. People were calling them zombies, though nobody wanted to use that word officially. The dead were coming back, or at least they looked dead, moved like dead things, but they were still moving, still attacking, still spreading the infection through bites. The news channels were calling it the greatest national security crisis in American history. The president was addressing the nation, declaring a state of emergency, mobilizing the military, closing the entire southern border. But it was too late for that. The infection was already inside, spreading through the border cities, San Diego, El Paso, Laredo, all of them. The hospitals were overwhelmed within hours. People who got bitten died within hours and came back as those things. The medical system collapsed. Then the power grid started going down in sections as workers abandoned their posts. Cell service became spotty. The internet was slow, then gone in some areas. Communication was breaking down. Society was breaking down. I tried calling my mom in LA, but I couldn't get through. The lines were jammed, everyone trying to reach their families. I left messages telling her to stay inside, lock the doors, don't let anyone in. I didn't know if she'd get them. The base was on lockdown, only essential personnel allowed to leave, and I wasn't essential for anything except fighting. They armed us to the teeth and sent us out in patrols to secure the surrounding areas, to evacuate civilians, to kill infected. I'd been in combat before, but this was different. In Afghanistan, the enemy was human. They could be reasoned with, negotiated with, at least in theory. These things weren't human anymore. They were predators driven by a single instinct: feed. My patrol consisted of 8 Marines, including Jenkins and me, led by a sergeant named Ramirez. We were assigned to sweep through a residential area in Chula Vista, evacuating survivors and clearing infected. We moved through the streets in 2 Humvees, weapons ready. The neighborhood looked like a war zone. Cars were crashed into each other, into houses, bodies lay in the streets, some torn apart, some just lying there, and you couldn't tell if they were really dead or if they'd get up when you got close. We learned quickly to shoot anything that looked suspicious, better safe than sorry. We found survivors hiding in their homes, barricaded behind doors and windows. We evacuated them when we could, loading them into the Humvees, taking them to designated safe zones that weren't really safe at all, just temporarily secure. One house we entered, we found a family of 4 hiding in the bathroom. The father had a shotgun, almost shot us when we broke down the door. His wife and 2 kids were crying, terrified. We got them out, but as we were loading them into the vehicle, infected came out of nowhere, drawn by the noise. There were 6 of them, former neighbors maybe, people from the same street. They moved fast, faster than the ones I'd seen at the border. We opened fire, cutting them down, but one got past us and grabbed the mother. She screamed, and the father tried to pull her free, but the thing bit into her shoulder, tearing flesh. We killed it, but the damage was done. The woman was crying, bleeding, and we all knew what that meant. The father knew it too. He held her, begging us to save her, but there was nothing we could do. Sergeant Ramirez pulled me aside and told me we had to move. We couldn't wait. I looked at the family, the father holding his dying wife, the kids crying, and I felt something break inside me. We left them there. We had to. 20 minutes later, we heard a single gunshot from behind us. The father taking care of it, taking care of his wife before she turned. The patrols continued for days, and each day was worse than the last. The infection spread faster than we could contain it. San Diego was falling apart. The downtown area was a nightmare of burning buildings, crashed cars, and roaming packs of infected. The police tried to maintain order at first, but they were overwhelmed. Some of them turned, got infected, came back. I saw a CHP officer eating another officer in the middle of the highway, and I had to shoot them both. The military established checkpoints throughout the city, trying to create safe zones, but they kept falling. The infected didn't get tired, didn't need to eat or sleep in the way we did. They just kept coming, relentless. I was on a patrol in National City near my old apartment when we got ambushed. Not by infected, by humans. A group of them, armed with rifles and pistols, opened fire on our Humvee from the windows of a strip mall. We took cover and returned fire. I couldn't understand why they were shooting at us until Sergeant Ramirez explained that some people thought the military was responsible for the outbreak, that it was a government conspiracy, a biological weapon gone wrong. They were fighting us because they thought we were the enemy. We didn't have time for their bullshit. We suppressed them with superior firepower and moved on, leaving them to whatever fate awaited them. Later that night, we heard that the strip mall had been overrun by infected. Everyone inside was dead or turned. During a brief lull, while we were resupplying at the base, I finally got through to my mom on a satellite phone. She was alive, still in LA, but things were bad there too. The infection had reached the city, spreading from the ports and the rail lines and the highways. She was staying with neighbors, people she trusted, trying to stay safe. I told her I loved her, told her to keep fighting, to stay alive. She told me to do the same. We both knew we might not talk again. The call dropped after 3 minutes, and I couldn't get through again. I sat in the barracks that night, unable to sleep, staring at the ceiling, thinking about everything I'd lost, everything that was gone. Maria, my apartment, my normal life, all of it was gone like it had never existed. The brass called another briefing, and this time the news was even worse. Intelligence reports indicated that the outbreak hadn't been an accident. There was evidence of deliberate release, that someone had weaponized the virus and used it as a bioweapon. The virus itself had originated from a research program at a classified facility in Nevada, Area 51 or somewhere near it, a program designed to study rabies and other neurological diseases for potential military applications. Somehow the virus had been stolen or leaked, and it had ended up in the hands of bad actors. The prime suspect, according to intelligence, was a Mexican cartel, specifically the Tijuana cartel, and they deliberately released it to create chaos along the border, to overwhelm law enforcement, to open up smuggling routes. The name of the cartel lieutenant believed to be responsible was Diego Santos, a ruthless enforcer known for his brutality and his complete lack of morals. He'd allegedly gotten his hands on the virus through a corrupt scientist who'd worked at the Nevada facility, and he'd released it in Tijuana and other border cities, not caring about the consequences, not caring that it would spread out of control. When I heard that name, Diego Santos, I felt a cold rage settle over me. This wasn't a natural disaster or an accident. This was murder on a massive scale. This man had killed millions, destroyed our world, for what? Money? Power? It didn't matter. He had to pay. I wasn't the only one who felt that way. The Marines around me, we all wanted revenge, wanted to make someone answer for this nightmare. But Santos was somewhere in Tijuana, deep in cartel territory, surrounded by his people and by millions of infected. Getting to him would be impossible, unless we made it possible. Lieutenant Morrison pulled me aside after the briefing. He told me that I was being reassigned to a special operations task force, a small team being put together to go into Tijuana and locate Diego Santos. The mission was off the books, deniable, because officially the U.S. military wasn't supposed to cross into Mexico without permission, and the Mexican government was barely functional at this point. The mission was simple: find Santos and kill him. No capture, no trial, just elimination. I didn't hesitate. I volunteered immediately. Morrison told me the team would leave in 48 hours, and I should get my affairs in order. I didn't have any affairs to get in order. Everything I cared about was already dead or dying. The team consisted of 6 operators, all Marines, all experienced in combat. There was me, Corporal Antonio Vargas. There was Sergeant Ramirez, who'd been leading my patrols. There was a sniper named Corporal Lewis, a woman from Montana who could shoot the wings off a fly at 800 yards. There was a combat medic, Lance Corporal Davis, who'd been with us since the first night at the border. There was a demolitions expert, Corporal Hayes, who could blow up anything you needed blown up. And there was our team leader, a captain named Foster, a hardened Special Forces operator who'd been pulled from another unit for this mission. Foster briefed us on the plan. We'd cross into Tijuana at night, moving on foot through areas we knew to be relatively clear of infected. We'd use intelligence from drones and satellites to navigate to the location where Santos was believed to be hiding, a warehouse in an industrial district controlled by the cartel. We'd go in, eliminate Santos and anyone with him, and get out. The whole operation should take less than 6 hours if everything went according to plan. Of course, nothing ever went according to plan. We geared up with everything we could carry: rifles, pistols, grenades, ammunition, medical supplies, rations, water. We wore body armor and night vision gear. We moved out in the middle of the night, crossing the border at a point where the fence had been torn down by the infected. The ruins of the checkpoint where I'd been stationed that first terrible night lay behind us. Now just twisted metal and blood-stained concrete. We moved south into Tijuana, and immediately the situation was worse than anything I'd seen on the American side. The city was burning, entire neighborhoods on fire, the sky lit up with orange flames. The streets were filled with infected, thousands of them, maybe tens of thousands. We moved carefully, using the shadows, avoiding contact whenever possible. When we had to fight, we used suppressed weapons, taking headshots, moving the bodies out of sight. It was slow, methodical, exhausting. We made our way through the city, following the route Foster had planned, using back alleys and side streets, avoiding the main roads where the infected congregated in massive hordes. We passed through neighborhoods that had once been vibrant and alive and were now silent graveyards. Bodies everywhere, buildings collapsed, cars burned. The smell was overwhelming, a mixture of decay and smoke and chemicals. We wore masks, but it barely helped. Lewis puked twice into her mask and kept moving. None of us judged her. We all wanted to puke. We all wanted to run. But we had a mission. It took us 5 hours to reach the industrial district where Santos was supposed to be hiding. By then, the sun was starting to rise, and visibility was increasing, which was bad for us. We found the warehouse, a large concrete structure surrounded by a chain-link fence topped with barbed wire. There were guards outside, cartel soldiers armed with automatic weapons. They hadn't been infected yet, which meant Santos had somehow created a safe zone here, kept the infected out. That made sense. He'd released the virus, he probably knew how to protect himself from it. We observed the warehouse from a distance, counting guards, looking for entry points. Foster made the call. We'd go in hard and fast, eliminate the guards, breach the warehouse, find Santos, kill him, and extract. No finesse, no subtlety, just violence. We split into 2 teams. Ramirez, Lewis, and I would take the front entrance. Foster, Davis, and Hayes would take the back. We synchronized our watches, gave ourselves 60 seconds to get into position, and then we moved. I came around the corner with Ramirez and Lewis, and we opened fire on the guards. They didn't have a chance. We cut them down before they could raise their weapons, 4 men dead in seconds. We breached the front door with a shaped charge that Hayes had given us, and we were inside. The warehouse was dark, filled with crates and machinery, perfect for ambush. We moved carefully, weapons up, using our night vision. We heard gunfire from the back of the building, Foster's team engaging more guards. Then we heard screaming, and the sound of something else, something inhuman. The infected were inside the warehouse. Santos had kept them in here. Maybe as a defense, maybe just because he was insane. They came at us from the shadows, a dozen of them, fast and vicious. We opened fire, full auto, burning through magazines. I shot 3 of them before they got close, then switched to my sidearm and shot 2 more. One got past me and tackled Lewis, and I shot it off her, the round going through its skull and barely missing her face. She gasped thanks, and we kept moving. We found stairs leading up to a second level, an office area overlooking the warehouse floor. That's where Santos would be. We went up, clearing rooms, and found more cartel soldiers. They fought hard, but we were better trained, better equipped. We killed them all. At the end of the hallway was a reinforced door, and we could hear someone inside shouting in Spanish. Ramirez kicked the door open, and we rushed in. The room was an office filled with maps and documents and computers. Standing behind a desk was Diego Santos. I recognized him from the intelligence photos, a tall man with a scarred face and cold eyes. He was holding a pistol, and next to him was another man, older, wearing a lab coat. The scientist who'd given him the virus. Santos raised his weapon, and Lewis shot him in the hand, disarming him. He screamed and clutched his bleeding hand, and the scientist raised his hands, surrendering. Foster's voice came over the radio, telling us they'd secured the back of the warehouse and were moving to our position. I walked up to Santos, and he looked at me with pure hatred. "You know what you've done?" I asked him in Spanish. My parents had made sure I was fluent. Santos spat blood at me. "I know exactly what I've done," he said. "I've burned your world down. You Americans think you can control everything, dominate everyone. I showed you that you can't." I felt that cold rage again, the same rage I'd felt when I first heard his name. "You killed millions of people," I said. "Children, families, for what?" Santos laughed, a horrible sound. "For profit, for chaos, because I could, and because fuck you." I looked at Ramirez and Lewis. They nodded. We didn't need to say anything. We all understood. I raised my M4, put the barrel against Santos's head, and pulled the trigger. His skull exploded, and he dropped to the floor, finally dead. The scientist started crying, begging for mercy. Foster arrived, took one look at the situation, and shot the scientist himself. No mercy for the people who'd created this hell. We searched the office, gathering documents and hard drives, anything that might contain information about the virus, about how to stop it. Then we heard a sound that made my blood freeze, an air raid siren wailing across the city. Foster checked his radio and his face went pale. "We need to leave," he said. "Now," he explained as we ran back through the warehouse. Command had made the decision to sterilize the border cities. Biological contamination was too severe, the infection spreading too fast. They were going to firebomb Tijuana and San Diego both, burn out the infection with incendiary weapons, and if that didn't work, they had authorization to use tactical nuclear weapons. We had 30 minutes to get out of the city before the bombs started falling. 30 minutes. We ran through the streets of Tijuana as the infected closed in from all sides. The noise of the sirens had drawn them, thousands of them, a sea of dead flesh and gnashing teeth. We fought our way through, burning ammunition, dropping grenades, moving as fast as we could. Hayes got grabbed by 3 of them and went down. We tried to save him, but there were too many. He screamed at us to go, and we did, leaving him behind. His screams followed us for blocks. Davis got bitten on the leg, a deep wound, and he knew what it meant. He kept running anyway, keeping up with us even though he was bleeding badly. We made it to the border, climbing over the ruined fence, stumbling onto American soil. Behind us, Tijuana was a vision of hell, the entire city swarming with infected, the sky dark with smoke. We ran north, trying to put distance between us and the city. Above us, we could hear aircraft, bombers coming in low. The first wave hit Tijuana, and the sky lit up with fire. Incendiary bombs, white phosphorus, napalm, the old weapons from old wars. The city became an inferno, flames reaching hundreds of feet into the air. The heat was intense, even from a mile away. We kept running, reached a beach area, the Pacific Ocean stretching out to the west. Behind us, San Diego was burning too. The same treatment, the same firebombing. The infection was being purged with fire. Foster got on the radio, calling for extraction, for a helicopter to pull us out. But the response was negative. All aircraft were dedicated to the bombing runs. We were on our own. We made it to the beach, and I looked back at the cities, both of them burning, the border between them erased by flames. Davis collapsed on the sand. The wound on his leg had turned black, infection spreading fast. He looked at us and smiled sadly. "It's been an honor," he said. We knew he was going to turn soon. Foster made the call. He put his sidearm to Davis's head, and Davis closed his eyes. "Do it," he whispered. Foster pulled the trigger, and Davis went still. 3 of our team left. Me, Ramirez, Lewis, and Captain Foster. We sat on the beach, watching the cities burn, knowing that everything was gone. Ramirez broke the silence. "You think the fire will stop it?" he asked. Foster shook his head. "No, the infection's already spread too far. This is just damage control. We've lost." We stayed on that beach for hours, watching the fires, waiting for something, anything. Eventually, a military patrol found us and evacuated us to Camp Pendleton. But the base was being abandoned, everyone moving further north, falling back to defensive lines in Orange County, in Los Angeles, in the Central Valley. The infection was everywhere, spreading faster than we could retreat. Reports came in from all over the country. New York was falling, Chicago was falling, Atlanta, Miami, Dallas, Houston, all of them reporting massive outbreaks. The virus had spread through air travel, through trade routes, through the movement of refugees fleeing the border. The entire world was collapsing. I spent the next weeks fighting a losing battle, moving from one defensive position to another as they failed one by one. We tried to save civilians, but there were too many infected, not enough of us. I saw the military fall apart as units broke down, as soldiers deserted to find their families, as officers gave conflicting orders or no orders at all. I saw the government abandon the West Coast entirely, ordering a retreat to the Rocky Mountains, to areas that could be more easily defended. But the infected followed. They always followed. They didn't need supply lines or logistics or coordination. They just needed to feed. I ended up back in San Diego, or what was left of it, part of a small group of survivors hiding in the ruins. The firebombing had destroyed most of the city, but sections remained standing, and we held out in a fortified building near the waterfront. There were about 20 of us, civilians and military mixed together, all of us exhausted, all of us knowing that we were living on borrowed time. Ramirez and Lewis were with me, the only other survivors from the Santos mission. We'd become something like friends, bound together by shared trauma. We spent our days scavenging for supplies, our nights fighting off infected that got too close to our shelter. The zombies were everywhere, roaming through the burned-out streets in packs, hunting. They'd evolved, or maybe we just understood them better now. They were faster in groups, smarter in a primitive way, capable of rudimentary problem-solving. They could open doors if they watched someone do it first. They could use simple tools, rocks and pipes, to break through barriers. They were learning, adapting. One night we heard helicopters overhead, military birds, flying patterns like they were searching for something. Foster got on the radio trying to make contact, and he finally reached someone. The voice on the other end told him that the decision had been made at the highest levels. The infection could not be contained by conventional means. The president had authorized the use of nuclear weapons on major population centers that were too far gone to save. San Diego was on the list. A tactical nuclear device would be deployed within 72 hours to completely sterilize the region, destroy the infected, and halt the spread. Anyone still in the area needed to evacuate immediately. Foster asked where we were supposed to go, and the voice told him to move north, away from the blast zone, and hope for the best. Then the transmission ended. We looked at each other, the weight of it settling over us. Nuclear fire. They were going to erase us, erase everything. Some of the civilians in our group broke down, crying, refusing to believe it. Others got angry, demanding that we fight back, resist, do something. But there was nothing to do. We couldn't stop a nuclear weapon. We couldn't evacuate in time, not with the infected everywhere, not with no vehicles, no fuel, no clear route out. Foster made the decision for us. We'd make a run for it anyway, try to get as far north as we could before the bomb dropped. It was suicide, but staying was certain death. We gathered what supplies we could carry, armed ourselves, and prepared to move at first light. Before we left, I took a moment to myself, standing on the roof of our shelter, looking out over the ruins of San Diego. The city I'd protected, the city I'd loved, was gone. Nothing remained but ash and bones. I thought about my mom in LA, wondering if she was still alive, if she'd made it out before that city fell too. I thought about Maria, about my dad, about everyone I'd lost. I thought about Diego Santos and the day I'd killed him. The satisfaction I'd felt when I pulled that trigger, and I knew it hadn't been enough. Killing him hadn't stopped anything. The virus was still spreading. The zombies were still winning. We'd failed. I'd failed. We moved out at dawn, 20 of us in a tight column moving through the burned streets toward the coast. The plan was to follow the shoreline north, avoid the major roads where the infected congregated, use the beach as our route. It was risky, but everything was risky now. We made it about 3 miles before the first attack. They came from the ruins of a collapsed building, at least 50 of them, maybe more. We formed a defensive circle and fought back, firing into the mass of bodies, dropping them one by one, but they kept coming. I saw Lewis go down, pulled into the horde, torn apart. I tried to reach her, but Ramirez grabbed my arm and pulled me back, shouting that it was too late. We had to move. We broke formation and ran, the survivors scattering. I ran with Ramirez and Foster and maybe 5 others, the rest lost behind us. We ran until we couldn't run anymore, found shelter in an overturned cargo container on the beach, and collapsed inside, gasping for air. We stayed there for hours, listening to the infected prowling outside, waiting for them to lose interest and move on. Eventually they did, drawn away by some other sound or smell. We emerged and kept moving, down to 7 people now. The beach stretched ahead of us, endless sand and surf, and beyond it the ocean, dark and indifferent. We walked for hours, passing through areas that had been beautiful once, beaches where families vacationed, where children played. Now they were graveyards, littered with corpses and burned vehicles. The sun climbed higher, and the heat became oppressive. One of the civilians, an older man, collapsed from exhaustion and dehydration. We gave him water, tried to get him moving again, but he couldn't. His heart gave out, and he died right there on the sand. We left his body and kept moving. 6 of us left. By nightfall, we'd made it maybe 15 miles north of where we started, not nearly far enough. The blast radius of a tactical nuke was at least 20 miles, maybe more, and we were still well within it. Foster checked his watch and estimated we had less than 24 hours before the bomb dropped. We set up camp on the beach, built a small fire, and ate what little food we had left. The other survivors, 3 civilians and Ramirez, sat around the fire in silence. Nobody wanted to talk about what was coming. Foster pulled me aside and told me he was going to stay behind, buy the others time to get further away. He'd been bitten earlier, during the attack that killed Lewis. He'd hidden it, kept fighting, but the infection was spreading. He was going to turn soon. I started to argue, but he cut me off. "You need to lead them," he said. "Get them out of the blast zone. That's an order, Corporal." I nodded, unable to speak. Foster handed me his sidearm and his ammunition. "Make it count," he said. Then he walked away from the camp, back toward the south, toward the ruins. I heard a single gunshot an hour later, echoing across the beach. Foster was gone. The 5 of us left camp before dawn and pushed hard, moving as fast as we could. One of the civilians, a young woman named Sarah, was slowing us down. She was injured, a sprained ankle from running the day before, and she was struggling to keep up. Ramirez and I took turns supporting her, but it was costing us time. We made it another 10 miles by midday, still not far enough. The radio Foster had been carrying crackled to life, and I picked it up. A voice was broadcasting a final evacuation warning. The nuclear strike would occur at 1800 hours, 6 p.m. Anyone still in the San Diego metropolitan area would be killed. The broadcast repeated on a loop. I checked my watch. It was 1 p.m. 5 hours. We had 5 hours to get clear. We pushed harder, ignoring exhaustion, ignoring pain, ignoring everything except the need to move. One of the civilians, a man named Tom, started falling behind. He told us to go on without him, that he couldn't keep up. Ramirez tried to help him, but Tom refused. He sat down on the sand and pulled out a flask of whiskey from his jacket. "I'm done running," he said. "Go." We left him there, drinking and watching the ocean. 4 of us now. Me, Ramirez, Sarah, and another civilian, a teenage boy named Marcus, who hadn't spoken since we left the shelter. We kept moving, kept pushing, and the sun climbed toward the horizon. At 5 p.m., we were still within the estimated blast zone, maybe just barely, but inside it nonetheless. Sarah finally collapsed, unable to go on. Her ankle was swollen and black, probably broken. She looked up at us with tears in her eyes. "I'm sorry," she said. "I can't." Ramirez looked at me, and I saw the resignation in his face. We both knew we weren't getting out of this. I sat down on the sand next to Sarah, and Ramirez sat beside me. Marcus stood there looking at us, then sat down too. We'd run as far as we could. We'd fought as hard as we could. Now we were done. The sun was setting over the Pacific, painting the sky in colors that were almost beautiful if you could forget about everything else. I thought about my mom one last time, hoped she was somewhere safe, somewhere far from this nightmare. I thought about Maria and my dad and everyone I'd lost. I thought about Diego Santos and the moment I'd killed him. The only good thing I'd done in this whole disaster. At least I'd made him pay. At least he was burning in hell where he belonged. That was something. At exactly 6 p.m., the sky to the south lit up brighter than the sun. The nuclear device had been deployed, not just one, but several, I realized, as multiple flashes appeared across the horizon. Tijuana, San Diego, all of it was being vaporized, erased from existence. The shockwave hit us seconds later, a wall of heat and pressure that picked us up and threw us like ragdolls. I felt my body tumbling, felt the sand and the air and the fire all mixed together, and then I felt nothing at all. When I woke up, I was lying on the beach, half buried in sand. My entire body was burned, my skin blistered and blackened. I couldn't hear anything, my eardrums blown out by the blast. I looked around and saw Ramirez lying near me, not moving, his body charred. Sarah was gone, completely gone, vaporized. Marcus was crawling toward the water, his clothes on fire. I tried to move, tried to help him, but I couldn't. My legs wouldn't work. I watched him reach the water and collapse into the surf, the flames going out, his body floating face down. I lay there on the beach, unable to move, watching the sky turn black with radioactive ash. The mushroom clouds rose to the south, massive and terrible, the funeral pyres of 2 cities, of millions of people, of everything I'd ever known. The infected were being destroyed by atomic fire, but so was everything else. The virus wasn't cured, wasn't stopped. It was still out there, spreading across the country, across the world. This was just one battle in a war we'd already lost. The zombies had won. They'd taken everything. I thought about dying there on that beach, thought it would be easier to just close my eyes and let go. But I didn't. I kept breathing, kept fighting, even though I didn't know why anymore. Maybe out of spite. Maybe because I'd survived this long and some stupid part of me refused to give up. Maybe because I'd killed Santos and that gave me something to hold on to, some sense of purpose, even if it was meaningless in the end. I lay there as the sky grew darker, as the ash began to fall like snow, as the radiation sickness started to set in. I knew I was dying, knew I wouldn't last more than a few days, maybe less. But I'd survived the blast. I'd made it this far. That counted for something, even if it was nothing. Hours passed. Night came. I heard sounds in the darkness, movement, groaning. Some of the infected had survived too, far enough from the blast to avoid the initial destruction, now wandering through the fallout zone, still hunting, still driven by that endless hunger. I heard them getting closer, smelled the rot and the decay. I tried to reach for my weapon, but I couldn't move my arms. I was helpless, lying there waiting for them to find me. This was how it ended, not in a blaze of glory, not fighting until my last breath, but broken and helpless, about to be torn apart by the same monsters I'd been fighting. There was a certain poetry to it, I suppose. The universe had a sick sense of humor. The infected found me. I saw their shapes in the darkness, silhouettes against the burning horizon. They stumbled toward me, 3 or 4 of them, drawn by the smell of my blood or my breath or whatever it was they hunted by. I closed my eyes and waited for the pain, waited for the end. But it didn't come. The infected stopped standing over me and they didn't attack. I opened my eyes and looked up at them. Their faces were ruined, burned by the blast, flesh hanging off their bones. But their eyes were still that same milky white, still vacant and dead. They looked down at me, and one of them reached out, touched my burned skin with its rotting hand, and then pulled back. They turned and walked away, leaving me there. I didn't understand. Maybe I was too far gone, too close to death, and they didn't recognize me as food anymore. Maybe the radiation had damaged them too, confused whatever instinct drove them. Or maybe, just maybe, there was some last remnant of humanity buried deep in those dead brains that recognized me as one of them now, another victim of this plague, another casualty of the world's ending. I lay there through the night, drifting in and out of consciousness, the pain coming in waves, sometimes unbearable, sometimes distant and dreamlike. I thought about my life, about the choices I'd made, the people I'd loved, the things I'd done. I thought about the Marine Corps and the oath I'd taken to defend my country, and I wondered if I'd fulfilled that oath or failed it. I'd killed Diego Santos, the man responsible for starting this nightmare, but it hadn't changed anything. The virus was still spreading, the dead were still walking, the world was still ending. My revenge had been hollow, satisfying for a moment, but ultimately meaningless. Santos was dead, but so was everything else. Dawn came, and I was still alive, though I didn't know how. The sun rose over the ocean, blood red through the ash and the smoke, casting a hellish light over the beach. I could see the ruins now, the full extent of the destruction. The nuclear blasts had created a wasteland, a desert of glass and ash where cities had once stood. Nothing moved except the wind, carrying radioactive particles across the landscape. The border between the United States and Mexico, the line I'd spent years defending, was gone, erased by atomic fire. There was no border anymore. There was no America anymore. There was no Mexico. There was just death and ash and the slow crawl of the virus across what remained of the world. I heard a sound, footsteps, and I turned my head as much as I could. A figure was walking toward me along the beach, a silhouette in the red light. For a moment, I thought it was one of the infected, but then I saw it was human, or at least still living. The figure came closer, and I saw it was a woman, maybe in her 30s, wearing tattered clothes and carrying a rifle. She looked down at me, assessing, deciding. "You alive?" she asked. I tried to speak, but my throat was too burned, too damaged. I managed a nod. She knelt beside me, checked my wounds, and shook her head. "You're not going to make it," she said bluntly. "Radiation sickness, burns, internal injuries. You've got hours, maybe a day." I already knew that. She looked at me with something like pity. "You want me to end it?" she asked, raising her rifle. I thought about it. Thought about the easy way out, the quick end. But I shook my head. I'd come this far. I'd survived the blast. I wanted to see how this ended, even if it was just another hour, another day. I wanted to bear witness. The woman shrugged. "Your choice," she said. She stood up and looked out at the ocean, at the ruins, at the wasteland that stretched to the horizon. "It's all gone," she said quietly. "Everything. The infected are everywhere now. The government's collapsed. The military's gone. There's no one left to fight them, no one left to save us." She looked back down at me. "Was it worth it?" she asked. "All the fighting, all the death? Did it change anything?" I didn't have an answer for her. I'd killed the man responsible, executed him like he deserved, but it hadn't stopped the virus. It hadn't saved anyone. It had been personal revenge, nothing more. I'd done it because I needed to, because I couldn't let Santos live after what he'd done. But it hadn't mattered in the grand scheme of things, and the zombies had won anyway. The woman walked away, disappearing into the ruins, and I was alone again. The sun climbed higher, and the heat became intense, baking the sand around me. I felt my body shutting down, organ by organ, system by system. I thought about my mom one last time, about whether she'd survived, whether she'd made it somewhere safe. I hoped she had. I hoped someone had. But I knew deep down that the infection would reach everywhere eventually. The virus couldn't be stopped, couldn't be cured. It was too aggressive, too adaptable. Humanity was finished. The age of man was over. The age of the dead had begun. I heard them again, the infected, moving through the ruins, their groans carried on the wind. Thousands of them, maybe millions, spreading across the wasteland, searching for prey that didn't exist anymore. They'd inherit the earth now, a world of ash and radiation and decay. They'd wander through the ruins of civilization until they finally broke down, until their bodies decayed beyond function, until nothing remained but bones and dust. And maybe, centuries from now, when the radiation faded and the earth healed, something new would emerge, something that would find the bones and the ruins, and wonder what had happened here, what had destroyed the world. They'd never know the full story. They'd never know about the virus, about the cartel, about Diego Santos and his terrible choice. They'd never know about the people who'd fought and died trying to stop it. We'd be forgotten, erased by time and fire and the relentless march of the dead. I closed my eyes and felt the sun on my face, felt the pain receding as my body gave up its fight. I thought about the moment I'd pulled the trigger, the moment Santos's life ended. I thought about the satisfaction I'd felt, the justice, however small and meaningless. I'd killed him, I'd made him pay. That was all I had left, the only victory in a war we'd lost completely. It wasn't much, but it was mine. I held on to that thought as the darkness closed in, as my breathing slowed, as my heart struggled to beat. I held on to it until there was nothing left to hold. The beach was quiet except for the wind and the distant sound of the infected. The sun continued to rise, indifferent and eternal, casting its light over a world that no longer existed. The border between nations, the lines we'd drawn on maps, the wars we'd fought over territory and ideology, all of it was meaningless now. The virus had crossed every border, infected every nation, destroyed every government. The dead walked everywhere, and the living were nearly extinct. This was the end of everything, the final chapter of human civilization written in blood and fire and atomic ash. Antonio Vargas died on that beach, alone and broken, just another casualty in a war that humanity had lost before it even began. His body would lie there until the infected found it, until it decayed and returned to the earth, until nothing remained but bones bleaching in the radioactive sun. He'd been a soldier, a Marine, a man who'd tried to do his duty and protect his country. He'd killed the man responsible for the outbreak, but it hadn't saved anyone. The zombies had won, the virus had spread, the world had ended. And in the final moments, as his consciousness faded, as death claimed him, Antonio Vargas understood the terrible truth. There were no heroes in this story, no salvation, no hope. There was only survival, brief and brutal, and then there was nothing. The dead had inherited the earth, and the living were just waiting their turn to join them. The border was gone, the cities were gone, the nations were gone, everything was gone. And still the infected walked, hungry and relentless, spreading across the wasteland. The final victors in a war they didn't even know they were fighting. This was how the world ended, not with a bang, but with a whimper, not with hope, but with despair, not with victory, but with total and absolute defeat. The virus had won, the zombies had prevailed, and humanity's long story, millions of years in the making, came to an end on a beach between two dead cities, under a blood-red sun, in a world consumed by fire and death and the endless, insatiable hunger of the dead. The waves continued to roll in from the Pacific, washing over the sand, over the bodies, over the ruins. The ocean didn't care about the end of the world. It would continue long after the last human died, long after the last infected fell apart, long after the radiation faded and the ash settled. The Earth would heal eventually, the planet would recover, and life would go on in some form, though humanity would not be part of it. We'd destroyed ourselves, not through nuclear war or climate change or any of the catastrophes we'd feared, but through our own hubris, through the belief that we could control nature, weaponize disease, play God. Diego Santos had been the instrument of our destruction, but we'd created the weapon he used. We'd built the virus, researched it, kept it in a lab, and when it got out, when it reached the wrong hands, we'd been unable to stop it. We'd done this to ourselves. The infected continued to spread, moving north beyond the blast zone, beyond California, beyond the West Coast. They moved through the ruins of Los Angeles, through the Central Valley, through the mountains and the deserts. They moved east toward Nevada and Arizona, south into what remained of Mexico, north into Oregon and Washington. They were unstoppable, relentless, driven by an instinct more powerful than fear or pain or reason. The virus had turned them into perfect predators, perfect survivors, unable to die from anything except massive head trauma or complete destruction of the brain. They didn't need food in the traditional sense. They just needed to feed, to tear flesh, to spread the infection. They were the ultimate invasive species, and the world was their ecosystem now. The few survivors who remained, scattered across the country in small pockets, fortified bunkers, remote areas, tried to hold on, tried to survive. But they were hunted, surrounded, slowly picked off one by one. The infected found them eventually. They always did. There was no safe place, no sanctuary, no escape. The virus had won the war for the planet, and the dead were claiming their prize. In bunkers beneath Washington, D.C., in NORAD facilities in Colorado, in submarines beneath the ocean, the last remnants of government and military tried to coordinate, tried to plan a counterattack, a way to take back the world. But they had no solutions. The nuclear strikes had failed to stop the spread. The firebombing had failed. The quarantine zones had failed. Everything had failed. The only option left was to wait, to hide, to hope that the infected would eventually decay into nothing. But that would take years, maybe decades, and there weren't enough supplies to last that long. The few survivors would run out of food, water, ammunition, medicine. They would emerge from their hiding places eventually, and when they did, the infected would be waiting. In those final days, as humanity's last light flickered and died, some people tried to preserve knowledge, to leave something behind for whatever came after. They stored data, recorded histories, sealed time capsules with information about who we were and what we'd accomplished. They hoped that someday someone or something would find these records and know that humanity had existed, that we'd built civilizations and created art, and loved each other and tried to be good, even if we'd failed in the end. But most likely those records would never be found. They'd decay, be destroyed, be lost to time. And even if they were found millions of years in the future by some other species that evolved on Earth or visited from the stars, what would they think of us? What would they make of a species that had created such wonders but had also created the means of its own extinction? Would they pity us, judge us, learn from our mistakes? Or would they simply not care, moving on to explore the ruins and extract whatever resources remained, indifferent to the ghosts of a dead world? Antonio Vargas's body lay on the beach for days before the scavengers found it. Not human scavengers, but birds, insects, the small creatures that survived the blast and the radiation. They picked at his flesh, scattered his bones, returned him to the earth piece by piece. The metal of his dog tags glinted in the sun, the only marker of who he'd been, a name and a number that meant nothing now. Corporal Antonio Vargas, USMC, service number etched into steel, a man who'd tried to do his duty and had failed through no fault of his own. He'd killed the villain, executed the man responsible for the outbreak, but it had been too late. The damage was done, the virus was spreading, and the world was ending. His revenge had been personally satisfying, but strategically meaningless. Diego Santos was dead, burned in the nuclear fire along with everything else. But the virus he'd released lived on, spreading across the planet, consuming everything in its path. In the months that followed, the infected continued their inexorable spread. They reached every continent, every country, every corner of the world. Islands that had hoped their isolation would protect them found infected washing up on their shores, carried by ocean currents on debris and wreckage. Remote villages and mountains and jungles found themselves under siege by shambling hordes that climbed over any obstacle, pushed through any barrier. The Antarctic research stations fell silent one by one as the infected reached them, brought by infected researchers who'd fled other facilities. Space stations orbiting the Earth watched helplessly as their home planet died, as the lights went out in city after city as the world below turned dark. The astronauts knew they'd never go home, that they'd die in space, running out of supplies, running out of air, but they kept recording, kept documenting, kept trying to understand what had happened. Maybe their data would survive, beamed into space, captured by some future civilization. Maybe someone would know the truth. The virus itself was evolving, adapting to its new hosts, spreading in ways no one had predicted. Scientists in the final days before communication networks collapsed completely had tried to understand it, tried to find a cure or a vaccine, but the virus was too complex, too aggressive. It rewrote the host biology at the cellular level, kept the body animated after death, maintained minimal brain function focused solely on feeding and spreading. It was a perfect weapon, a perfect plague, and it had been created by human hands in a laboratory in the Nevada desert, in a facility that no longer existed, destroyed by the very government that had funded its research. The scientists who'd created it were dead, killed in the initial outbreak, or executed by military personnel trying to contain the spread. Their research was destroyed, their labs burned, their knowledge lost. No one would ever fully understand the virus now. It would remain a mystery, a plague that destroyed civilization and left no answers behind. The world burned, and the infected walked through the flames, unaffected by heat or pain or fear. They walked through radioactive wasteland, their bodies absorbing lethal doses of radiation that would have killed any living thing but seemed to have no effect on them. They walked through chemical spills and biological hazards and environmental disasters, immune to everything except physical destruction of the brain. They were the ultimate survivors, the ultimate predators, and the world belonged to them now. The age of humanity was over, ended not by natural disaster or cosmic catastrophe, but by our own arrogance, our own belief that we could control forces we didn't understand, weaponize nature itself. We'd created the virus, and the virus had destroyed us. It was poetic justice, in a terrible way. We'd gotten exactly what we deserved. In the ruins of San Diego and Tijuana, in the radioactive wasteland where two cities had once stood, where millions of people had lived and worked and loved and died, the infected wandered through the glass and the ash, searching for prey that no longer existed. The blast had killed most of them, vaporized thousands, but some had survived in protected areas, in underground spaces, in locations far enough from ground zero to avoid instant death. They emerged into a hellscape of radiation and destruction, their bodies damaged but still functioning, still driven by that endless hunger. They searched for food, found nothing, and kept searching, kept moving, kept existing in a state between life and death that defied all understanding. They would wander those ruins for years, decades, until their bodies finally broke down, until radiation and decay and simple physics caught up with them. But that would take time, more time than any human had left. The sun set over the Pacific, casting long shadows across the beach, where Antonio Vargas had died. The waves continued their eternal rhythm, washing away the ash, cleansing the sand, indifferent to the death of a world. The ocean would survive this, would outlast the virus and the infected and the radiation. The ocean was eternal, patient, uncaring. It had seen species rise and fall before, had seen extinction events and catastrophes, and it would see them again. Humanity was just another species, another chapter in the long history of Earth, and like all chapters, it had come to an end. The infected would inherit the ruins, would walk the earth until they fell apart, and then the earth would reclaim everything, grow over the cities, bury the roads, erase the monuments and the buildings and all trace of human civilization. In 1,000 years, maybe 10,000, there would be nothing left but ruins in the jungle, bones in the desert, mysteries for whatever came next. And the virus would be gone too, its hosts decayed, its purpose fulfilled, extinct like the species it had destroyed. This was the end of everything, the final chapter, the last page of humanity's story. We'd fought and loved and built and destroyed, and in the end, we'd lost. The zombies had won, the virus had prevailed, and the world moved on without us, indifferent and eternal, waiting for the next chapter to begin. The science building was one of those modern glass and steel structures that looked out of place among the historic architecture. A couple of campus police cruisers were already there, along with an ambulance. I parked and walked over to where a young campus officer was talking on his radio, looking pale and shaken. "State Police," I said, showing my badge. "What have we got?" "I don't know, sir," he said, his voice unsteady. "We got a call about a break-in, but when we got here, the door was open, and there's something wrong with the people inside. Professor Martinez is bleeding and making these sounds, and we can't get close to him. He tried to bite Officer Chen." "Tried to bite him?" I frowned. "Is he on something?" "I don't know. The paramedics won't go in. They're saying we need hazmat protocols." I followed him inside, and immediately the smell hit me. It was like rotting vegetables mixed with something chemical and sharp. The lobby was empty except for scattered papers and an overturned chair. Blood was smeared across the floor in long streaks. I drew my weapon and moved forward carefully, calling out, "Massachusetts State Police. Anyone injured, call out." The sound that came back wasn't words. It was a wet, rattling moan, almost mechanical in its repetition. I found Professor Martinez in one of the labs, and what I saw made my stomach turn. He was on his knees, his face pressed against the floor, and there was something growing on him. White and gray fungal growth, like mushrooms, sprouting from his neck and ears. His skin had a greenish tint, and his eyes when he looked up at me were completely white. No pupils, no iris, just milky nothing. He opened his mouth, and that sound came out again, and I saw more of that growth inside, coating his tongue and throat. "Jesus Christ," I whispered. "Martinez, can you hear me? I'm going to get you help." He lunged at me with a speed that caught me completely off guard. I stumbled backward, and his teeth snapped an inch from my forearm. I shoved him back hard, and he hit a lab table, knocking over beakers and equipment. I got my radio up and called for backup, for hazmat, for anyone who knew what the hell I was looking at. Martinez was getting back up, his movements jerky and wrong, like his body was fighting against him. More of those fungal growths were visible now, pushing through his clothes, spreading across his skin in real time. I could see them growing, pulsing, reaching out like they were alive on their own. Campus police sealed off the building, more troopers arrived, then federal agents in black SUVs. They set up a perimeter and wouldn't tell us anything except to keep everyone back. I gave my statement to a humorless man in a suit who barely looked at me while he took notes. "What was that thing?" I asked him. "What's wrong with Martinez?" "Contamination event," he said flatly. "The building is now under federal quarantine. You need to go to the decontamination station they're setting up." "Decontamination?" I didn't touch him. "Protocol," he said and walked away. They sprayed us down with some kind of chemical solution that burned my eyes and made my skin itch. They took blood samples and made us fill out forms. It was noon before they let me go, with instructions to report any symptoms: fever, disorientation, unusual growths on skin. I drove back to the barracks in a daze. The image of Martinez's white eyes and fungal-covered face burned into my mind. My partner, Detective Sarah Chen, was at her desk when I walked in. We'd been working together for 6 years, and she could read me better than my ex-wife ever could. "You look like you saw a ghost," she said. "Worse," I told her and described what I'd seen. Sarah was a decade younger than me, Harvard graduate actually, which she never let me forget. She pulled up her laptop and started searching while I made coffee. "Mycology lab," she said. "That's fungi research. Let me see. Okay, here's something. There was a paper published last month by a graduate student named Kenneth Liu. He was arguing that certain parasitic fungi could be engineered to affect human behavior, specifically to prove a hypothesis about societal collapse under biological pressure." That sounds insane. His committee rejected it. Apparently there was a big fight about ethics and feasibility. He got kicked out of the program. She kept scrolling. There's a note here from campus security 3 weeks ago. Liu was caught trying to enter the lab after hours. They banned him from the building. You think he broke in, released something? I think we should find him and ask. But Kenneth Liu was gone. His apartment in Alston was empty, cleared out in a hurry. His roommate said Liu had been acting strange for weeks, muttering about how no one understood his research, how he was going to prove them all wrong. The roommate hadn't seen him in 3 days. We put out a bolo, and I went home that night with a bad feeling in my gut, the kind of instinct you develop after years of police work when something is about to go very, very wrong. The news that night was full of the Harvard incident. They were calling it a chemical leak, saying the building would be closed for remediation. Professor Martinez was in quarantine at Massachusetts General Hospital. The official line was contamination from research materials, nothing to worry about, no public health threat. But I'd seen Martinez's face. I'd seen those growths spreading on his skin. That wasn't a chemical burn. That was something alive. I couldn't sleep. I kept checking my arms and neck for any sign of fungal growth, any discoloration. Around 2 a.m, I gave up and turned on the TV. Breaking news. 2 more cases at MGH, both staff members who had treated Martinez. They were showing the same symptoms, the same white growths, the same aggressive behavior. The hospital had locked down their isolation ward. The governor was calling it a developing situation and urging calm. I grabbed my phone and texted Sarah, "This is spreading. Get ready for a long day tomorrow." Her response came immediately. Already awake, seeing reports from Cambridge hospitals, 3 more cases, all connected to Harvard campus. Wednesday morning felt different. The city was on edge. You could feel it in the air. More people were wearing masks on the subway. Coffee shops were less crowded. I got to the barracks and found it in chaos. There had been 17 new cases overnight, all in Cambridge and Somerville. The CDC had arrived and set up a command post at the Heinz Convention Center. We were being mobilized for quarantine enforcement and crowd control. The chief gathered everyone in the briefing room and showed us photos of the infected. They all had that same fungal growth, the same white eyes, the same aggressive behavior. "These people are extremely dangerous," he said. "They're not responsive to verbal commands. They've attacked medical staff, bitten paramedics, shown incredible resistance to pain. Until we know more, treat them as armed and dangerous. Use necessary force to protect yourselves and others." "What about protective gear?" someone asked. "If this thing is contagious." "Hazmat suits are being distributed. Gloves and masks minimum. Don't let them bite you, don't let them scratch you. Any exposure, you report immediately for decontamination and quarantine." I spent that day helping set up checkpoints around Cambridge. The National Guard had been called in. We were stopping cars, checking people for symptoms, turning away anyone who didn't have essential business. The infected were being transported to a temporary containment facility at Fort Devens. I saw 2 of them up close when we responded to a call at a Cambridge apartment building. A young woman, maybe 25, had locked herself in her apartment after her roommate attacked her. The roommate was in the hallway, and by the time we got there, she was barely recognizable as human. The fungal growth covered half her face, gray-white nodules that pulsed and spread even as we watched. She was crawling on her hands and knees, making that horrible wet breathing sound, and when she saw us, she scrambled forward with terrifying speed. "Contact!" Sarah shouted, and we both had our weapons up. The infected woman didn't stop. She came right at us, her mouth open wide, teeth snapping. Sarah fired twice, center mass, and the woman went down but kept moving, kept reaching for us. I fired once more, headshot, and she finally stopped. We stood there in that hallway, our hearts pounding, looking at what we'd just done. This wasn't an arrest. This wasn't subduing a suspect. This was killing someone who'd been transformed into something else. The woman we'd come to help was hysterical, screaming about how her roommate had woken up sick that morning, had been normal just yesterday. We got her out and into decontamination. More cases were being reported every hour. The hospitals were overwhelmed. They'd stopped admitting infected patients and were just trying to isolate them wherever they could find space. By Thursday morning, there were over 200 confirmed cases in the Boston area. Schools were closed. Public transit was running limited service. The governor declared a state of emergency and requested federal assistance. I barely went home. We were working 16-hour shifts, sleeping in the barracks when we could. The infection was following a pattern. It started with flu-like symptoms, then the growths appeared within hours, spreading rapidly across skin and mucous membranes. The infected lost cognitive function quickly, becoming violent and single-minded in their need to attack others. They seemed drawn to noise and movement. Some moved slowly, shambling and uncoordinated. Others were terrifyingly fast. Headshots were the only reliable way to stop them. The CDC was saying it was a fungal infection unlike anything they'd seen before, possibly engineered. They were looking for the source. We found Kenneth Liu's manifesto on Friday. It was posted to multiple websites and social media platforms simultaneously. A 20-page document detailing his research and his intentions. He claimed he'd modified a strain of cordyceps fungi, the kind that parasitizes insects in nature to affect human neural tissue. He deliberately released it in the Harvard lab to prove his theory that modern society was too fragile to withstand a biological crisis, that our infrastructure and social bonds would collapse within days. He included data, charts, projections. He said he'd done humanity a favor by exposing our weakness. He signed it. The collapse has begun. I am the shepherd of a new world. He's a goddamn terrorist, Sarah said when we read it. He murdered all those people to prove a point. Where is he now? I asked. This was posted today. He's still out there. The FBI took over the manhunt, but they brought us in since we knew the area. They'd traced Liu's digital footprint to multiple locations around Cambridge and Boston. He was moving, staying ahead of authorities, but he was also watching the chaos unfold. He'd been spotted twice, once near Harvard Square and once in the South End, always wearing a respirator mask and gloves. He wanted to survive his own creation. He wanted to watch it work. The city was falling apart. By Saturday, there were over 1,000 infected in the greater Boston area. They'd breached the Fort Devens containment facility, overrunning the guards in a coordinated assault that shouldn't have been possible for people with fungal infections rotting their brains. But there was something about the way they moved, like they were being directed by something beyond individual thought. The fungus was a network connecting them, giving them horrible purpose. They didn't eat their victims, not really. They bit and scratched, spreading the infection, then moved on to find more people. It was about propagation, not hunger. The infected were gathering in groups, dozens of them together, moving through neighborhoods in waves. We'd respond to calls and find entire apartment buildings compromised. Fungal growth spreading across walls and floors like the buildings themselves were being consumed. The stuff grew fast in darkness and moisture. Basements and subway tunnels were becoming death traps. People were fleeing the city in panic, clogging the highways. Others barricaded themselves in their homes. The grocery stores were looted clean. Power was intermittent. Cell service was spotty. The National Guard had checkpoints on all major roads, but they were being overrun. I watched a man die on Sunday. We were trying to clear a residential street in Brookline when we found him trapped in his car, infected, beating on the windows. We got him out, but one of them had scratched his leg through the car door, just a small cut, barely bleeding. We bandaged it and told him to get to a medical checkpoint. 6 hours later, we got a call that he'd turned. The infection was moving faster now, adapting, spreading more efficiently. The initial symptoms that had taken a day now took hours. The fungal growth that had been slow was now explosive. Sarah and I were paired with a National Guard unit clearing apartment buildings. We wore full hazmat suits now, though they were hot and limited our mobility. We'd go door to door, checking for survivors, putting down infected. It was brutal, mechanical work. Each apartment was its own horror show. Families who'd died together, people who'd tried to fight back with kitchen knives and baseball bats. The fungal growth was everywhere, covering furniture and walls, creating this nauseating organic landscape. It smelled like decay and earth, sweet and rotten all at once. In one apartment, we found a little girl hiding in a closet. She couldn't have been more than 7 years old. Her parents were in the living room, both infected, both dead now from our bullets. She was crying, asking for her mom. I picked her up and carried her out, and I felt something break inside me. What kind of world were we living in where children had to watch their parents turn into monsters? Where we had to shoot sick people like rabid animals? This wasn't police work, this was something else entirely. We took her to one of the emergency shelters, but even those weren't safe. 2 days later, that shelter was overrun. I heard about it on the radio, how the infected had gotten inside somehow, how hundreds of people died or were infected in the chaos. The little girl was probably dead, or worse, she was one of them now, stumbling through the streets with white eyes and fungal nodules sprouting from her small body. I drank myself stupid that night, alone in my apartment, until Sarah called and told me to pull it together. "We have work to do," she said. "Liu's been spotted. FBI thinks they have him cornered." The location was the Boston Public Library, the old McKim building in Copley Square. It made a sick kind of sense. Liu had been a researcher, had spent years in libraries and archives. Maybe he thought he'd make some kind of final stand there, surrounded by the knowledge humanity had accumulated. The FBI had the building surrounded. They wanted him alive, wanted answers about the infection, about whether there was any way to stop it. But I didn't care about that. I wanted him dead for what he'd done. We went in with a tactical team, moving through the marble halls and reading rooms. The library was dark, power cut off, and we used flashlights that created dancing shadows. Books were scattered everywhere, pulled from shelves in what looked like a mad research session. We found notes in Liu's handwriting, pages and pages of observations about the infection's spread, statistical analyses of mortality rates, philosophical ramblings about human nature and survival. He was treating this like an experiment, documenting results while the city burned around him. We found him in the Bates Hall reading room, sitting at one of the long tables with books stacked around him. He was wearing his respirator, but took it off when he saw us, smiling. Kenneth Liu was younger than I expected, maybe 28, with the kind of soft, academic look that made you think he'd never thrown a punch in his life, but his eyes were bright with something feverish and terrible. "Officer Murphy," he said, reading my name tag. "And Detective Chen, how fitting. Law enforcement, here to arrest me for proving the truth." "You murdered thousands of people," Sarah said, her weapon trained on his chest. "You unleashed a biological weapon in a civilian population. That's terrorism, Liu. That's mass murder." "I revealed the fragility of society," he corrected calmly. "Everything I predicted has come true. Look at the chaos outside. Your institutions have failed. Your government can't protect you. The infection spreads exponentially because humans are social creatures, because we live in dense populations, because we've built a world that's perfectly designed for our own destruction. I didn't create the problem. I just exposed it." "You're insane," I said. "I'm a scientist. I observed, I hypothesized, I tested. The results are conclusive." He gestured to the books around him. "History is full of collapses, plagues, famines, wars. Civilizations fall when they can't adapt to changing conditions. The cordyceps modification I created is simply another selective pressure. Those who survive will build something new." "You're not going to survive me," I told him. "You're under arrest. Get on the ground." He laughed. "Arrest? For what? For telling the truth? For proving what every epidemiologist and disaster planner has known for decades? You can't arrest an idea, Officer Murphy. The collapse has already begun. Even if you kill me, the fungus will spread. It's self-sustaining now, evolving, adapting to its host species. In 6 months, every major city will look like Boston. In a year, human population will be reduced by half. I've done what nature couldn't. I've balanced the equation. The FBI agents were calling for us to bring him out peacefully. But I looked at this smug, self-satisfied monster who'd killed thousands to prove an academic point, and something in me snapped. I thought about Martinez with fungi growing from his throat. I thought about that little girl hiding in the closet. I thought about all the bodies we'd had to step over, all the infected we'd had to shoot, all the normal people whose lives had been destroyed because this piece of shit wanted to prove a thesis. I put my gun away and walked toward him. Sarah called my name, but I didn't stop. Lou stood up, still smiling, still thinking he was untouchable because he was smart and had all the answers. I grabbed one of the heavy books from the table, a massive hardbound volume of American history, and I hit him with it. His nose broke with a wet crunch. He went down, shocked, blood streaming down his face. I hit him again and again, slamming that book into his head with all the rage and grief and terror that had been building for days. "Sean, stop!" Sarah was pulling at me, but I couldn't stop. I kept hitting him, feeling bones break, seeing blood and brain matter leak out onto the library floor. I beat Kenneth Lou to death with a textbook about the founding of the nation he'd helped destroy. And when I finally stopped, my arms were shaking and his face was completely caved in. Unrecognizable. The FBI agents were shouting. Sarah was yelling at me to put the book down. I dropped it and stood there, looking at what I'd done. Lou's body twitched once and went still. "He's dead," I said numbly. "He can't hurt anyone else now." They arrested me right there in the library, cuffed me and read me my rights while Lou's blood cooled on the marble floor. But everything was so chaotic that they didn't know what to do with me. There was nowhere to process an arrest. The courts were closed. The jails were overrun with infected. They ended up just taking my badge and gun and telling me to go home, that there would be consequences later if we all survived. I didn't care. I'd killed him. That was all that mattered, but Lou had been right about one thing. The collapse was accelerating. By the end of that week, Boston was lost. The infection had spread to every neighborhood. The infected numbered in the tens of thousands. They'd learned to work together somehow, the fungus coordinating their movements, and they were taking over the city block by block. The military tried to establish safe zones, but every zone was eventually breached. People were dying or turning faster than we could count. The hospitals were morgues. The police barracks was under siege. We evacuated by helicopter, those of us who were left. Sarah came to my apartment the day before the military evacuation. "They're pulling everyone out," she said. "Federal government is abandoning the city. They're going to try to contain it with a firebreak strategy." "What's a firebreak strategy?" I asked, though I already knew. "They're going to bomb it, sterilize the infection zone. They're saying limited tactical strikes to destroy infected populations and fungal growth, but Sean, they're going to level the city, everything from Cambridge to Dorchester. They're evacuating civilians now, but anyone who stays is going to die." "When?" 3 days. They're giving people 3 days to get out." I looked out my window at Quincy Bay, at the Boston skyline in the distance. Smoke was rising from a dozen fires. I could hear gunfire and sirens. The city I'd protected for 12 years was being eaten alive by fungus and the walking dead. "I'm not leaving," I said. "Sean, I killed Lou, but it didn't matter. He was right. Everything fell apart. I can't just run away from that. There's nothing you can do here. The infection is too widespread. Even if we kill every infected person, the fungal growth itself is releasing spores. The whole area is contaminated. Then I'll die here. I'm not abandoning my city." Sarah looked at me for a long time, and I saw her decision before she spoke. "Okay, then I'm staying too. We've been partners for 6 years. I'm not leaving you to die alone." We spent the next 2 days helping with the evacuation. Most of the civilians got out, convoys of cars and buses streaming west on the Mass Pike. But thousands stayed, either by choice or because they had nowhere else to go. The infected were everywhere now. You couldn't walk a block without encountering them. They'd started to change, the fungus continuing to consume and transform their bodies. Some were barely recognizable as human anymore, just shambling masses of gray-white growth with human shapes underneath. The fungal network was growing through the sewers and subways, spreading beneath our feet, connecting the infected into one massive organism. We joined up with a group of survivors holed up in Fenway Park. Someone had the idea that the stadium's concrete and steel structure would provide good defensive positions. There were maybe 200 of us, a mix of civilians, cops, firefighters, and National Guard members who'd refused evacuation orders. We barricaded the gates and set up defensive positions on the concourses and in the stands. We had some weapons, some food, some medical supplies. Not enough, but it was what we had. The infected came on the second night, thousands of them drawn by the concentration of human life. They filled Lansdowne Street and Yawkey Way, pressing against the walls and gates, climbing over each other, a tide of rotting flesh and fungal growth. We fired from the walls, picking them off, but they kept coming. They were learning, adapting their tactics. Some of them were using tools now, picking up bricks and debris to throw. Others were spreading the fungal growth deliberately, touching walls and surfaces to seed new colonies. "They're not mindless," Sarah said as we reloaded. "The fungus is controlling them, but it's intelligent. It's trying to maximize spread." "Then we can't win," I said. "We're just delaying the inevitable." "Maybe, but I'd rather die fighting than run away." The siege lasted for 2 days. We held them off, barely, losing people to bites and scratches and exhaustion. The fungal growth started appearing inside the stadium, sprouting from cracks in the concrete where spores had drifted. We burned it when we found it, but it kept coming back. Food and water ran out, ammunition ran low, people started to break, losing hope, giving up. I found a man sitting in one of the luxury boxes with a gun in his mouth, and I didn't stop him when he pulled the trigger. What was the point? We were all dead anyway. On the third day, we heard the jets, high-altitude bombers that left white contrails across the autumn sky. The military was coming to sterilize their failure. I stood on the pitcher's mound at Fenway Park, the same place where my grandfather had watched Ted Williams play, where I'd brought my daughter when she was little, back before the divorce, back when life was normal. Sarah stood beside me. Around us, the last survivors of Boston waited for the end. "Do you think it matters?" Sarah asked quietly. "What we did here, all the people we tried to save?" "I don't know," I said. "Maybe it's enough that we tried." The first bombs hit Cambridge, lighting up the morning sky with fire. We felt the ground shake. More followed, walking across the city in a careful pattern, destroying neighborhoods block by block. Harvard burned, MIT burned, downtown burned. The historic neighborhoods I'd known my whole life disappeared in seconds, replaced by fire and smoke and ash. The infected in the streets around Fenway looked up at the approaching destruction with their white eyes, still reaching for us, still trying to spread the infection even as death came from above. A cruise missile hit Kenmore Square and the blast wave knocked us off our feet. I landed hard, my ears ringing, tasting blood. Sarah was next to me, saying something I couldn't hear. The stadium was shaking, concrete cracking. More missiles were coming. I could see them in the sky, dark shapes against the smoke, bringing oblivion. I thought about my daughter, safe in California with her mother. I thought about all the infected we'd killed, all the people we'd tried to save. I thought about Kenneth Liu's smug face before I'd beaten it in. None of it had mattered. He'd won. The collapse had come, and humanity had proven exactly as fragile as he'd predicted. The fungus would spread beyond Boston. The infection would reach other cities. Maybe it would consume the whole world eventually. Or maybe humanity would adapt, would learn to fight it, would survive in some reduced form. But Boston was done. Massachusetts was done. This chapter of human history was ending in fire and nuclear cleansing. The next missile was coming straight for Fenway. I could see it tracking down through the smoke, could feel the moment of impact approaching. Sarah grabbed my hand and squeezed it tight. "It's been an honor, Murphy," she said, and I heard her clearly despite the ringing in my ears, heard every word. "Honor's mine, Chen," I said back. The stadium lit up white and hot, and then there was nothing but light and sound, and the world ending all at once. And my last thought before everything disappeared was that at least I'd killed the bastard who'd done this. At least Liu hadn't gotten to watch his triumph. And then even that thought was gone, burned away in nuclear fire as Boston died and took me with it. And somewhere in the burning ruins, the infected were dying too, but the fungus was spreading its spores on the wind. riding the firestorm to new locations, to new hosts. And the outbreak continued despite the bombs, despite the fire, despite humanity's desperate attempt to stop what they'd created. Because Kenneth Liu had been right about one thing after all. We'd built a world that was perfect for our own destruction, and now we were reaping what we'd sown, and there would be no cure, no salvation, no happy ending. Just the long, slow collapse into a world where the infected walked, and the fungus spread, and human civilization crumbled into fungal-covered ruins, and my death meant nothing in the face of that. And Boston's death meant nothing, and the nuclear cleansing meant nothing because the outbreak was already beyond containment, already spreading to other cities, and its consciousness left me forever in that final moment of light and heat and destruction. I understood with perfect clarity that the world as I'd known it was over, and the age of the infected had begun, and there was nothing anyone could do to stop it now. The explosion vaporized everything within a half-mile radius of Ground Zero. Fenway Park, that historic cathedral of baseball where so many had cheered and hoped and dreamed, became a crater in an instant. The green monster collapsed into rubble. The seats where families had watched games together melted and burned. Sarah and I and everyone else who'd made our stand there were gone before we could feel pain. Our bodies turned to ash and scattered on the nuclear wind. But death wasn't the end of the story. Even as Boston burned, the infection continued. The military had hoped that the heat and radiation would sterilize the fungal growth, would kill every spore and infected body. But the cordyceps strain Liu had created was more resilient than they had anticipated. Deep in the subway tunnels, where the bombs couldn't reach, colonies survived. In the sewers beneath the burning streets, the fungus adapted to the heat and radiation, mutating in ways that made it stronger. Some of the infected, caught on the periphery of the blast zones, were blown outward rather than vaporized, their fungal-covered bodies spreading spores across the surrounding countryside as they landed. The evacuation convoys had carried infected with them, people in the early stages who showed no symptoms yet. They reached Worcester, Springfield, Hartford, spreading the disease into new populations. The fungus had evolved a longer incubation period, hiding itself better, making it past checkpoints and medical screenings. By the time the symptoms showed, it was too late. New outbreaks bloomed across New England like evil flowers opening in the sun. The federal government tried to contain it with more drastic measures. They quarantined the entire northeastern corridor. They bombed Providence and New Haven when those cities fell. They established military zones around New York and Philadelphia, killing anyone who tried to cross without authorization. But the infection continued to spread. A trucker carrying spores on his clothes made it to Chicago before turning. An infected passenger on a flight to Los Angeles infected the crew before they could land. The fungus traveled on wind currents, on clothing, on the surfaces of vehicles. It was patient and persistent and utterly indifferent to human suffering. The president addressed the nation from an undisclosed location, declaring martial law, promising that the military would stop the spread. But even as he spoke, the infection was in D.C., was in military bases, was in the bunkers where the government hid. The chain of command broke down, communication networks failed, power grids collapsed as infected overran facilities. In less than 3 months, every major city in North America had outbreaks. In 6 months, it had spread globally despite border closures and travel bans. The fungus found a way, always found a way, because that's what it was designed to do. Kenneth Liu's final victory was total. The society he'd deemed too fragile collapsed exactly as he'd predicted. Governments fell, infrastructure crumbled, billions died or were infected. The survivors retreated to rural areas, to mountains and islands, anywhere the fungus couldn't easily reach. They lived in small, isolated communities, always watching for signs of infection, always ready to kill or run. Some tried to rebuild, to preserve knowledge and technology. Others gave up, descended into tribalism and superstition. The world fractured into 1,000 pieces, each struggling to survive in the ruins of what had been. But the fungus thrived. It covered the abandoned cities in gray-white growth, turning skyscrapers into organic towers, spreading through streets and buildings like a vast neural network. The infected wandered through this new landscape, mindless extensions of the fungal intelligence that now dominated the planet. They didn't age normally, kept animate by the fungus, even as their bodies slowly decomposed. They became part of the fungal ecosystem, mobile seed pods spreading spores wherever they went. Scientists who survived, working in hidden labs and makeshift facilities, tried to understand the infection, tried to find a cure or vaccine. But the fungus was too complex, too adaptable. Every time they thought they'd found a weakness, it evolved a defense. Liu had designed it too well, had built in too many redundancies and survival mechanisms. It was, in a terrible way, the perfect organism, a parasite that had found its ideal host in humanity, that used our biology and behavior against us, that turned our greatest strengths into weaknesses. Some survivors insisted that humanity would recover, that we'd find a way to reclaim the world. But the evidence suggested otherwise. Birth rates had plummeted, resources were scarce, the knowledge base needed to rebuild civilization was fragmenting, lost as older survivors died and younger generations grew up knowing only the struggle for daily survival. Human population was in freefall, dropping year by year while the fungal network grew stronger and more widespread. The irony was that Liu had been trying to prove a point about societal collapse, but in doing so, he'd caused something far worse: the potential extinction of the human species. Not immediately, not in a dramatic extinction event, but slowly, gradually, as we lost the critical mass needed to maintain civilization. We were becoming another species the fungus had conquered, another host it had consumed and discarded. 20 years after the Boston outbreak, human population had dropped from 8 billion to less than 1 billion. The survivors were scattered, isolated, living in constant fear. The cities were dead zones, fungal gardens where the infected still wandered. The forests and fields were taking back the land, but even there, the fungus spread, adapting to new environments, finding new ecological niches. It had become part of the planet's ecosystem, a permanent fixture that would outlive any human attempt to destroy it. Some survivors spoke of me, of the trooper who'd killed Kenneth Liu in the Boston Library. The story had spread through the survivor networks, growing in the telling until I was some kind of folk hero, the man who'd taken down the terrorist who'd ended the world. But they didn't understand that killing Liu had meant nothing. He'd already won before I'd ever raised that textbook. His creation had escaped his control and spread beyond anything he'd imagined. My revenge had been empty, satisfying in the moment, but ultimately pointless. If there was any meaning to my death at Fenway Park, it was just this: I died trying to protect what I loved, even when I knew it was doomed. I'd stood and fought when I could have run. Sarah had stood with me. So had 200 others whose names would be forgotten by history. We'd made a last stand at a place that symbolized community and tradition and all the things that made us human. And then we'd been erased by nuclear fire. Our atoms scattered to the wind, our bodies never recovered, never mourned properly, just gone as if we'd never existed at all. But the fungus remembered. Deep in its vast neural network, in the chemical signals that passed between infected hosts and spore colonies, there might have been some record of us, of the humans who'd fought hard, who'd killed infected efficiently, who'd posed a threat to the organism's spread. We'd been obstacles to be overcome, problems to be solved, and the fungus had solved us with adaptation and persistence and sheer overwhelming numbers. It had learned from us, had incorporated our resistance into its evolutionary strategy, had become stronger for having faced us. In the end, that was humanity's legacy. We'd created the thing that destroyed us, and in our desperate attempts to survive, we'd made it more powerful. Kenneth Liu's modified cordyceps fungus was our last great invention, the final achievement of our science and civilization. We'd reached for godlike power over biology, and we'd created a god that consumed us. The age of humans was ending. The age of the fungus had begun. And there was no going back, no restart, no second chance. Just the slow fade into extinction, one survivor at a time, one community at a time, until there was nothing left but infected wandering through fungal forests. And even they would eventually decay and dissolve, and the planet would spin on without us, indifferent to our passing. My daughter lived longer than most. She survived in a small community in the Sierra Nevada for 35 years after Boston fell. She had children of her own, tried to teach them about the world before, about cities and technology and all the things they'd never see. But the infection reached them eventually, brought by a stranger seeking shelter. The community quarantined themselves, burned the infected, tried to contain it. But containment was impossible. It always found a way. She died at 52, infected like so many others, transformed into a shambling fungal colony that her own children had to kill and burn. My grandchildren survived a few years longer before their own communities fell to outbreak or starvation or violence. The human population continued to drop: 500 million, 300 million, 100 million. Scattered across the planet in ever smaller pockets, losing knowledge and technology with each generation, regressing toward subsistence living. Some groups developed resistance to the infection, a genetic mutation that made them less susceptible. But even they couldn't rebuild civilization. The infrastructure was gone. The resources were depleted or inaccessible. The fungal growth made travel dangerous. The infected, though decaying, still posed a threat. 100 years after Boston, human population was estimated at 50 million, though accurate counts were impossible. Most survivors lived in extreme environments where the fungus couldn't thrive: high altitudes, Arctic regions, deserts. They lived hardscrabble lives, always on the edge of extinction. The old world was a myth to them, stories told around fires about impossible things like electric lights and airplanes and cities where millions lived together peacefully. They didn't believe most of it. How could they? Their reality was so different, so diminished. 200 years after Boston, human population was perhaps 10 million. The survivors had adapted to their new world, had found ways to detect and avoid fungal growth, had developed cultural practices around infection control. They'd forgotten most of science and history. They lived in small tribal groups, hunting and gathering, occasionally trading with other groups. They feared the ruins of cities, saw them as haunted places where the dead walked. They weren't wrong. The infected had mostly decayed by then, their bodies consumed by the fungus until nothing recognizable remained. But the fungal network itself still lived, still spread, still released spores. It had become part of Earth's ecosystem, as natural as any other organism. Future generations of humans would see it as they saw any dangerous species, something to avoid, to respect, to live alongside carefully. They wouldn't know it had been created in a laboratory by one of their ancestors. They wouldn't know about Kenneth Lou or Boston or the collapse of civilization. They'd just know that the gray-white growth was death, and you stayed away from it. 300 years after Boston, humanity was functionally extinct as a technological species. Maybe 50,000 individuals remained, scattered across the globe in tiny communities. They had no writing, no mathematics, no complex technology. They lived like humans had lived 50,000 years ago, before civilization, before agriculture, before we'd started the long climb towards cities and science. The fungal apocalypse had reset us completely. Some of those communities would survive. Others would die out from inbreeding or disease or accident. Maybe in 10,000 years or 100,000, humanity would start climbing again. Maybe we'd rebuild, rediscover technology, create a new civilization. Maybe we'd find the ruins of the old world and wonder what had happened. Maybe we'd repeat the same mistakes, or maybe those 50,000 would be the last, dwindling generation by generation until there were none left, and the fungus would have its total victory, and Earth would spin on without its once dominant species, and in time there would be no trace we'd ever existed except some strange patterns in the geological record that no one would be around to read. That was Kenneth Lou's real crime, not the thousands he killed directly in Boston, not even the billions who died in the plague years. His real crime was extinguishing the light of human consciousness, ending the one spark of awareness and meaning in a universe of mindless matter. He'd proved his thesis about societal fragility, but the cost was everything we were and everything we might have become. He'd murdered the future itself. I'd killed him for it, beaten his brains out with a history book, and it hadn't mattered at all. His work survived him. His creation outlived us all. And my death at Fenway Park, Sarah's death beside me, the deaths of everyone who'd fought and suffered and tried to survive. All of it was just noise, just futile resistance against the inevitable. We'd lost before we'd even started fighting. The infection was too efficient, too adaptable, too perfect at its terrible purpose. If there was any consolation, it was this: the fungus itself would eventually die. When the last human host was gone, when there were no more warm bodies to infect and use, the network would begin to decay. Without human biology to sustain it, these modified cordyceps would revert to something simpler, would lose the complex adaptations that made it so deadly. In a few thousand years, it would be just another fungal species, no more dangerous than any other. The planet would recover from us. Life would go on, but humanity wouldn't be part of it. We'd be gone, erased, forgotten. The cities we built would crumble and be reclaimed by nature. The books we wrote would rot and dissolve. The art and music and science and philosophy we'd created over millennia would disappear like it had never been. All the struggle and achievement and hope that defined us would vanish into deep time, leaving no mark, no legacy, no meaning. That was the true horror of the Boston outbreak. Not the violence or the death or the transformation of people into monsters. The true horror was the erasure of human meaning from the universe. We'd fought to survive because we believed our survival mattered, that human consciousness was valuable, that our existence meant something. But the fungus proved otherwise. We were just meat, just another host species, just biomass to be consumed and converted. Our thoughts and dreams and loves meant nothing to the organism that destroyed us. We were nothing more than an ideal growth medium, and so the world ended. Not with a bang, but with a slow fade, a gradual decay, a long goodbye. The survivors lived and died, generation after generation, each knowing less than the last, each losing more of what made us human, until there was almost nothing left but the animal fear and the daily struggle to find food and avoid the fungal growth. And eventually even that ended, and the last human died alone somewhere, unmourned and unknown, and the planet spun on in silent indifference, and the fungus eventually died too, its purpose fulfilled, its host species consumed, and there was nothing left but empty ruins being reclaimed by simpler life. And if anyone had been around to remember, they might have said it had all been inevitable, that technological civilization carried the seeds of its own destruction, that we'd been too clever for our own good, that Kenneth Liu had been right about our fragility even as he proved it in the most horrific way possible. But there was no one left to remember, no one to pass judgment, no one to learn the lesson, just silence and decay and the slow work of entropy, breaking down everything we'd built, dissolving our monuments, erasing our presence from the earth, until it was as if we'd never existed at all. That was our fate. That was our ending. Total defeat. Complete extinction. The absolute triumph of the infection we'd created. And somewhere in the ruins of Boston, in the crater where Fenway Park had stood, where I died defending a symbol that no longer meant anything, the wind blew through fungal growth and scattered spores that no longer had anything to infect, and nuclear rain fell on ashes that had once been human bodies, and nothing moved except the slow decay of matter returning to simpler forms, and the universe continued its expansion toward heat, death, uncaring and eternal, and my consciousness was gone. But the memory of that final moment remained somehow, encoded in probability and quantum possibility, the last thought of the last man standing in the last city as the bombs fell and everything ended. I'd wanted to matter. I'd wanted my death to mean something. But in the end, meaning itself had died with humanity. And all that remained was the physical fact of my atoms scattered across a dead city in a dying world. And even that would eventually fade as the sun expanded and the earth was consumed in fire. And then even the atoms would dissolve as the universe reached its final state of maximum entropy. And truly nothing would remain, not even the possibility of memory, just empty space expanding forever into darkness. And the story of humanity, the story of Kenneth Liu's creation, the story of the Boston outbreak and the plague years and the slow extinction that followed, all of it would be as if it had never happened. Less than a dream, less than a thought, just a brief eddy in the river of entropy, already forgotten before it was finished, already meaningless before anyone could assign meaning to it. That was the real ending, not me dying at Fenway Park, not Boston burning under nuclear fire, not even the last human dying alone in some forgotten corner of the world. The real ending was the erasure of all possibility of meaning, the final victory of chaos over order, of death over life, of the fungal darkness over the light of human consciousness. Kenneth Liu had wanted to prove a point about societal collapse, but what he'd actually done was far worse. He'd proved that consciousness itself was a fragile accident, that meaning was an illusion, that everything we valued and fought for was ultimately dust and ashes and silence. And if there was any final thought to be had, any last word to speak into the void, it was simply this. We'd existed once, briefly, impossibly, against all odds in an uncaring universe, and we'd tried to matter, tried to build and love and understand, tried to create something that would outlast us. We'd failed, the infection had won, the collapse was complete. But for a moment, however brief, we'd been alive and aware and fighting. And maybe that was enough. Maybe that was all there ever could be. Just the struggle itself without hope of victory. Just the standing and fighting even when defeat was certain. Just the human refusal to go gently into extinction, even as extinction consumed us all. I'd beaten Kenneth Liu to death in a library surrounded by books that no one would ever read again. I'd died defending a baseball stadium that no one would ever cheer in again. Sarah had died beside me, her hand in mine, her last words about honor. We'd made our stand and lost, and it hadn't mattered, and it had never going to matter, but we'd done it anyway because that's what it meant to be human, to fight impossible odds with impossible courage for impossible reasons. And maybe in some other universe, some other timeline, some other possibility, that meant something. But in this universe, in this timeline, in this reality, it meant nothing at all. Just more bodies for the fungus to consume. Just more failure added to the mountain of human failure that stretched back to our beginning and forward to our ending. And so I died, and Sarah died, and Boston died, and humanity died, and the fungus spread and thrived and eventually died too. And nothing remained but silence and emptiness, and the slow heat death of the universe. And if there was any justice or meaning or purpose to any of it, I never found it, never saw it, never knew it, just ended in fire and ash and darkness with all the other doomed things that had thought they mattered, that had believed their existence meant something, that had fought to survive even as survival became impossible. And all of us were wrong. All of us were nothing. All of us were just meat and chemical reactions pretending to be significant in a universe that had never cared and never would. That was the truth Kenneth Liu had revealed. Not that societies collapse when stressed, but that everything collapses eventually, that nothing we build or create or love can last. That consciousness itself is just a brief flicker in an eternal darkness. That we're all fungal food in the end, decomposing and returning to simpler forms, and it doesn't matter how we die or when or why, because death is the only destination, the only certainty, the only truth that matters. I'd been a state trooper for 12 years. I'd thought I was protecting people, serving justice, making a difference. But I'd just been waiting to become food for an organism that had no concept of justice or protection or difference. All my work had been meaningless. All my effort had been wasted. I'd died for nothing, defending nothing, achieving nothing. Just another body in the pile. Just another failure in the great human tradition of failing. And if I could speak from beyond death, if consciousness persisted in any form, I would say only this. Kenneth Liu was right. We built a fragile world that couldn't withstand pressure. We created the tools of our own destruction. We pretended we were special, significant, important. But we were nothing. We never were anything. We never could be anything. Just temporary patterns in matter, brief interruptions in entropy, meaningless accidents that believed they had meaning. The fungus knew better. It didn't believe. It just consumed. It didn't hope. It just spread. It didn't dream of significance. It just existed, mindless and efficient, and ultimately victorious. That was reality. That was truth. That was the only lesson worth learning, and we learned it far too late, and it killed us all.